excited are you guys that I'm actually on time today? It is a Christmas miracle in April that I am actually on time today. In fact, I was so on time that I was sitting here 16 minutes early, all ready to go live. Guys, welcome to the stream. We have got what I think is a really exciting stream. Some people might think it's a little bit wonky, but what we are going to be doing today is we are going to be resuming watching testimony that happened on March 27th. So I don't know if it was last week. God, time is meaningless anyway. Let me look at a calendar real quick. I'm pretty sure it was the last week. We could call no, it was 9 days ago, so not quite within the last week time frame, but close enough. So 9 days ago in the Texas House of Representatives, they held a hearing on a bill to ban gender modification surgery for minors. And in that hearing, they had hours and 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 hours of testimony from people on both sides of the issue. And so what we're doing is we're just watching some of that testimony. We watched some of it last week. We watched a couple hours of it last week. And there are a couple things that are really interesting about this. Number one, it is really good to hear the arguments that are being made in favor of the bill because the sponsor of the bill is a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist. And so he speaks doctor. You can't get anything past this guy. He has thought it through. He's extremely level-headed. Has a great temperament. He knows exactly how to handle the lesbians that are trying to push for against this bill. And no offense to lesbians, I'm sure not all lesbians are as evil as the two lesbians that are in the Democratic Party that are going at everyone trying to undermine this bill. Judy gave me a on-time bonus of $2. Thank you, Judy. Well, damn, if I knew we were going to get Carlin on-time bonuses, I might have made a little extra effort. So that's the first thing that's really good about watching this hearing is actually hearing rational, just really calm, level-headed arguments in favor of banning gender modification surgery for minors. Because a lot of the arguments that people like us tend to hear are the people shouting, the people carrying on. Oh, you guys can see my vacuum cleaner right here. I didn't realize you could pay no attention to the vacuum cleaner sitting behind me. I thought it was sufficiently out of frame, but I guess not. Whatever. I vacuum my floors too, all right. So it's really good to hear though that commentary. But the other thing that's really interesting is, as I said, there are lesbians involved. Lesbians always make trouble. They do. I'm sorry, lesbians, you do. And the lesbians involved in this particular hearing are both Democrats. And every single person that is in favor of this bill, the lesbians are trying to undermine them, undercut them, discredit them. And so it's also really good for us to hear the arguments that the enemy is making. And it's really interesting to watch their body language and to see how they question people who are on their team, question people on the other team, stuff like that. This is going to prepare all of us to be able to better handle these questions and these conversations should we find ourselves in a position to have these conversations and be involved with these questions. Nick Incognito says on time because I embrace the cult. Yes, we're going to be talking about the cult in a second, but it is cult with a C, not cult with a K. So that's what we're going to be watching today. Now, we watched the first part of the hearing last time, and that was a couple hours. And then the part that we got up to was right when they were about to adjourn the hearing. Okay, not adjourn it. They were going into a recess for like lunch. So they basically, the part that we watched up until lunch when they took a break. Now, they came back from lunch and continued testimony for another 8.5 hours. The rest of the testimony, the video we're going to watch today, is 8.5 hours long. We are not going to watch this whole video. I need to manage expectations. We are not going to watch this whole video. No, no, no. I don't have the patience for that. I don't. But we're gonna watch, I think, a good bit of it. I don't know, maybe we'll get a couple hours, maybe we'll get 3 hours. We're gonna kinda play it by ear. We can always do another stream later where we're watching more of it if we find that this is a, useful exercise that is benefiting all of us, but I am not prepared at this point to watch the full 8 hours, if for no other reason than I have other stuff I need to do, alright? I have we can go all night long, except that I have other work I need to do. And sometimes it's better to split it up into chunks. No, I don't wanna go. I don't wanna do that because I actually want to listen to what they're saying. You can't shortcut listening, guys. You actually do need to listen. But we're gonna watch what we watch today. I'm sure we're gonna see some good stuff, and then we can make the choice to continue it on another day. How great is that? So that is what we have on the agenda for today is this Texas testimony from the House of Representatives. But before we get into that, I do have a couple other things that I would like to talk about. Number one, my main Substack, carlin.substack.com. This is where I put all my Unwoke content. Now, I made the decision the other day with the help and support of my supporter community because every single Monday at 7 p.m., I do a Zoom call with my supporter community. I also do one every single Wednesday at noon. These are private, these are unrecorded. We talk about a lot of stuff. And on Monday, I broached the idea of if people think that I should make my Substack behind a paywall because I've had a couple challenges with my main Substack in the past 3 months. Now, here's the good news. I have had a massive growth in paid subscribers in the last 3 months, and that's because I'm posting a lot more on Substack. I've written 75 articles on Substack in 3 months, okay? That's a lot of work. Some of those articles are original journalism that take a lot of time to do. I have been putting a lot of my time and energy into this, and I am very proud of the quality of work that I'm producing as a result of putting so much of my time and energy into this. I want this Substack to be my content hub moving, or Substack in general, rather. I want it to be my content hub moving forward. I have several different Substacks. This is my main one. And I think it's such a powerful tool and a great platform. And it's really helping to connect with more people and to share more information. However, I have also had an uptick in content creators, influencers, and even major media organizations deciding that they want to take my work and claim it as their own. And I'm not talking about, talking about the same story. I'm talking about I report on something that I am the only person to report on. And I know that because it's like a live event or something, and I'm literally the only person covering it at the time. And then all of a sudden, I start seeing my clips and my commentary come out of, well, the mouths of other people. And nowhere in that are they giving me credit for my work. Now, I can brush this off once or twice. At the end of the day, what is most important to me is that the stories get out there and the information gets shared. But when you're working 10 to 15 hours a day, every day of the week, only to have people steal your content because they're too lazy to do their own damn work, and then not have the temerity to at least credit you for doing the work in the first place, it starts to, well, grate. And so there are other reasons too for this. But I started talking about this with my supporter community on Monday, and it's something that I had hoped to avoid, but it kind of seems like I just had no other choice for at least for the moment. I have decided to make my main Substack largely behind a paywall. Okay. What that means is that when you go into an article like this one that I posted last night about Disney shareholders grilling the CEO over their woke business practices, you're going to be able to read a portion of that article, right? But then you're going to come down to a box at the bottom and you're not going to be able to read all of it. And the good stuff is what's behind the paywall. So I've decided to put that up on the Substack, and I really do hope that people who appreciate the work that I'm doing will consider becoming a subscriber for $5 a month, $50 a year. If you really can't afford to swing it financially, but you promise me that you will help share my content and get it out there, email me at activelyunwoke@gmail.com and I will do a little trade. If you promise me, Scout's honor, that you will share my content and you really can't financially support $5 a month to support it, then I will hook you up because I don't want anyone to be denied information that is really useful to them and that they care about just because some influencers on the internet are being morons. All right. But I do want to keep this up. And I really am going to be focusing moving forward on making sure that people who are supporting my work and paying for my work are getting the most attention and the most information and stuff like that. The reality is, guys, is I have a lot of big plans for the rest of the year. I have a list of about 87 things I want to get done, and I'm on like 5. Okay. I'm way behind where I want to be. And I simply need more paid supporters in order to be able to fund it because I'm entirely funded by you. If you want to know what my plans are, you can visit you can visit this article right here. If you want to know what my plans are for the rest of the year, I lay out my entire roadmap because if I'm asking you to pay me money, I want you to know what you're buying with that money. So I'm extremely transparent about what I'm working on, why I'm working on it, and I hope that you'll consider supporting it. I do have goals that I need to meet in order to be able to do this stuff, and this is just reality. If I don't have help from you, the people who are, really tuning in and engaging with this work, what I'm going to have to do is go get funding somewhere else. And that funding always comes with strings. It comes with me needing to placate a political ideology or a political tribe that I don't want to placate. It comes with me needing to lie or withhold information because it hurts someone's feelings that is writing the check. I really, 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 really don't want to do it. If it comes down to it at the end of the day, I probably would because I really do want to do what's in this plan. But ultimately, I want to be beholden to you, to people who are engaging with this information and using it in their real lives. And I want my only obligation to be to tell you the truth and to show you the receipts, not to please anyone else or anyone else's political agenda. So if you want to support the work I'm doing, head over to activelyunwoke.com slash Substack, or you could go to Carlyn, Karlyn .substack.com and sign up, and it's $5 a month, $50 a year. You can give more if you want to. If you are a supporter on my locals or my Patreon, I will be mirroring the content on those sites. So if you're a supporter in my locals community, you're still going to get access to the full article. If you are a supporter in my Patreon community, you're still going to get access to the full article. You don't need to like double dip. That's not what I'm asking for. I just need to do this to be able to protect my work and to make sure I'm being compensated for it, to be quite frank, because I'm spending a lot of hours doing this stuff, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it just doesn't, and that's just the way it goes. So I really do appreciate the support, guys. That really helps me out. Another thing I want to talk about is Unwoke art. So I do have an Unwoke art store up. I've been talking about it lately. You can sign up for the Substack for Unwoke art at unwokeart.substack.com. If you sign up for the first Substack, carlin.substack.com, you are not, I repeat, you are not automatically signed up for this Substack. The reason that I'm doing that is I want you to be in control of what information you receive. So I'm doing a bunch of Substacks that are topical and niche. If you want to sign up for all of them, great. If you only want to sign up for one of them, fine. If you want to sign up for 2 or 3 based on your interests, then that's cool too. So Unwoke Art is one of those Substacks. When you sign up to Unwoke Art, what's going to happen is you're going to get an email that looks a little bit like this. Every single time I post a new design in the Unwoke Art store, and you're going to get a chance to download the meme, post it wherever you want. All that is free, but then you can see merchandise that you can get the meme on, and this mug is like the most popular thing in the store right now, which is pretty great. But you're going to be able to see it on different products and decide if you want some merch. And of course, all of the merch goes to support the work I'm doing, but then you also get something cool and you get a gift. And I'm having just such a fun time with this whole thing. And I'm having so much fun that I have started a contest. And this is a contest that I really hope everyone will consider participating in, because this is an AI art contest. And what I've done is have set up a way on Substack for people to be able to play around with AI, get a little bit creative. I truly believe that creativity and engaging in that type of energy is an antidote to woke culture. The more creative we are, the more things we're building, the more things we're putting out there, the better we see ourselves and the more value we see ourselves as having in the world. And if you see yourself as a valuable person, then you are much less likely to descend into the woke mindset. Okay. So I have this Unwoke art contest that's going on my Substack. Basically, what it is I have a list of prompts, and you can use any AI art program you want, or if you want to do traditional art like drawing or painting or whatever, as long as you can take a picture of it, that's fine with me. It's totally up to you. But I would really encourage you guys to use AI just because I think it's a really great tool. And what it is we're going to have 5 different prompts. And I selected woke, cancel culture, struggle session, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And I want you to use AI to create a visual representation of those prompts. And you don't have to do all of them. You can do as many or as few as you want. You can submit as many or as few pictures as you want. So, for example, and this is just an example, two-party system is not one of the prompts in the contest, but I just did this to illustrate what this means. So if I said two-party system is the prompt, I might make an image like this with Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell toasting each other because they're all best friends because it's all one party. Okay. So that would be an example of taking a prompt and making a visual representation of that prompt. Now, what you do when you're ready is on the Unwoke Art Substack, you're going to see this chat button right up here. Okay. Click on the chat button and then go down if you're on the web to open on the web. It's right under this QR code. You can open it on the app in your phone. Oh, I have to log in. Hang on. Fuck. Hang on. Yeah. Hang on. Hang on. I probably just showed information I shouldn't, but like whatever. Whatever. Hang on. It's got to get logged into this so I can actually show you what the chat looks like. One moment, please. Okay. I'm logged in. I am logged in. All right. So what I did in the chat is this is the chat module, and I created a new thread for each one of our prompts. So we've got one thread in the chat module for woke, one for cancel culture, one for struggle session, one for white supremacy, and one for patriarchy. You select whichever prompt you want. And again, you're allowed to submit as many images as you want. And you go into the chat module and you can click on that prompt and then you can upload your images. And you can see people are already entering images. So for woke, this person posted a bunch of images, Common Criminal. And Common Criminal says, my concept for woke deals with the constant influx of information driving young people insane. And I thought that was really great. And he posted a bunch of images that to him represent woke. And I wouldn't have thought of this. I thought that was really great. One of the reasons I set this up this way is so that you can see what other people are posting. So you can be inspired by what other people are posting. How cool is that? Yes, you can, bot. You can submit as many images as you like within one category. I'm going to explain how that works in a second. So we've got some other threads. Let me see who else. White supremacy. I mean, oh, that's an interesting one. From Cooley, there's an image for white supremacy. Thank you, Cooley, for that. We've got struggle session. That's an interesting image for a struggle session. Again, not something I would have thought about, like really going into battle. So you have the opportunity to be really, really creative with this. However you feel about those terms, I want you to create a visual representation of what those terms look like to you. And I think we're going to see some really creative ideas. Now, what's going to happen is you have until the end of April in order to submit these prompts. Okay. And at the end of April, what I'm going to do is I am going to choose my top 5 favorite images in each of the categories. And then we're gonna have a vote. So the community is actually gonna decide who is the winner for each category. And then it's kind of like a dog show. It's like best in show. First, you have to win your breed, and then you get to go on to the big competition. The top 5 winners from each of those categories are then going to be voted on about which image people like the best. And you're going to be able to win some prizes. So, for the prizes, the first place winner is going to receive a $100 gift card to my Unwoke art store to get some cool merch. Second place is going to get a $50 gift card. Third place is going to get a $25 gift card. And then everyone who enters, just for entering, we're totally doing a participation trophy here. If you enter, you're going to get a coupon code for 20% off any merch in the store that you want to buy. And then if you want me to put your designs, like the winning designs, on merch, I'm more than happy to do that. But you do have the option if you want to sell it in your own store too. That's cool too. Okay. So these are images that you're creating. If you want to do something with them, that's fine. But if you want me to put them on merchandise and actually sell them after we've had the contest, I'm more than happy to talk to you about that and how that works. And that way you can actually have people wearing your art, which I think is a pretty cool thing, and you can share it with your friends and family, stuff like that. It's going to be great. So I really do want to encourage everyone to enter the contest. If you've never worked with AI art before, don't worry. There are so many ways out there that you can do it, and it's so addictive once you start. I promise you guys are going to love it. I hope we get lots of entries to the contest, and I really, really can't wait to see what you do. Mama says, "Do you have an option for straight donations? I don't always like having platforms skirt the fees. You deserve it all." Just saying, Mama. I do actually have an option for straight donations. I just don't talk about it that much. So thank you for reminding me. Let me just show you if my browser wants to work. Why isn't my browser working? Huh, that's weird. One browser window just decided it's like, "Nope, not loading today. Not today, Satan." Well, that doesn't seem to be loading for some reason, but I do actually have an option for, like, just a one-time gift that all just comes directly to me through activelyunwoke.com/support. Did I freeze completely? No, I didn't freeze completely, apparently. I was like, "Did my internet just go out?" Um, so you can make a one-time gift on there, which of course I do appreciate. Now, I actually appreciate when people sign up as like monthly supporters though on like Substack or locals or even annual supporters, because what that does is I know we're paying platform fees, but the platform fees on locals and on Substack really aren't that much. And I'm happy to do it because they're providing me a service, right? They're providing me a service that I really value. And the thing of it is allows me to be able to predict how much income I'm actually going to have. So there are benefits to both, but I do appreciate you asking. And again, if you guys want to support my work, really, whatever way works best for you. All right? And I appreciate it all. One last thing I want to say before we get started is I had an idea last night. So I've been thinking for a while. Oh, hang on. Did you see the Lauren Southern video I DM'd you? Go woke, go broke is a lie. I haven't seen it yet, Naruto, just because I haven't really been looking at my DMs honestly today all that much. But I will definitely make sure to check it out, and I do appreciate it. So I have been thinking for a while about, you know, maybe just sprucing up the old YouTube, maybe taking it just a smidgen more seriously than I have been taking it. When I started this, it really was an accident that my YouTube channel grew the way it did. I didn't anticipate this. I was not prepared for this. I didn't even know how to do YouTube. I still don't really think I know how to do YouTube. And it has never been something that I've been like, okay, I'm going to build a professional YouTube channel and I'm going to have a show and I'm going to do all this stuff. And I really like the way the channel has developed because I've had the opportunity to dabble in like a lot of different things and kind of figure out what I like and find my voice and things like that. But I have decided that we're going to just start. I wouldn't say it's a rebrand, but maybe like an evolution of the YouTube channel. And I've decided to officially start branding my quote unquote show It doesn't actually mean much is gonna change in terms of function for the moment, but I'm putting together a more cohesive package, and I've decided to name my show The Cult. And this came from an epiphany at 3 a.m. last night as I was laying in bed. I was like, "You know what's a cool name for a show? The Cult. That's a cool name." And there's a lot of reason for this. First of all, there are lunatics on Twitter who claim that I am running some sort of cult and that I have mesmerized everyone and that I've put all of my supporters under a spell or a hex, and I demand that you do my bidding and all that good stuff. And so it is kind of like giving them the finger basically to say, "Mother effers, you have smeared me to high heaven on the internet. And so now I'm going to take your smears and I'm going to just turn them a little bit and I'm going to monetize them because you hate nothing more." So that was the first reason I decided to call it The Cult. Second reason is because I'm the if there is one running theme through all of the work that I'm doing, it's that I'm commenting on the culture war. So the cult is like it's short for culture, as in the culture war. You could also make the argument that the woke is a cult, that I'm doing commentary on the real life cult that we're all existing in and trying to rebel against every single day. And I get to say things like join the cult, welcome to the cult, support the cult. So we're going to be going through a little bit of like a rebrand or an evolution or whatever you want to call it. I hate the term rebrand because it's like it feels so artificial to me, and that's not what this is. This is just maybe putting a little bit better packaging on what I'm doing and taking it a little bit more seriously, like an adult probably should do. So, you're going to be seeing some changes on the channel as a result of that. And I also, because I can't do anything without having a Substack, I actually do have thecult.substack.com, which you might say was launched 8 months ago. It wasn't launched 8 months ago. It was launched at 3 a.m. last night. What happened is I renamed and got a new URL for a Substack I already owned that I wasn't doing anything with. And so I basically just like appropriated something else and was like, I'm going to do this now. So what I'm going to be doing on this Substack is I'm going to be turning my YouTube shows into like a podcast that will run through the Substack like an audio only podcast. You're also going to be able to download the videos from Substack or watch the videos from Substack. You're going to be able to get my show notes on Substack. So like if I have links or things that I'm like talking about on the show, you'll get them there. We're going to do segments, all that stuff. Basically, a lot of the stuff that I was already doing on YouTube, I'm just going to be creating a home for it on the Substack because, quite frankly, we can't rely on YouTube forever. And so I would like to have a home base there and make it more of like an official podcast, a show, that sort of stuff. And so that is where we're going to be going. And I really hope you guys like it. I'm actually really excited about this idea. So things like happy hour, things like Socialism Saturday, things like Nitwits or Disenrage, that's all going to be coming under the cult umbrella. None of that's going away. Fundamentally, the core content that I'm doing is not going to be changing, but it's just going to be packaged just a little differently. And of course, like Actively Unwoke is a complement to this, and I'm really excited about it. I think it feels new, it feels fresh, it feels fun, it feels a little subversive and all that good stuff. And of course, that's always a good thing. So if you guys want to sign up for that Substack, this is not going to be launching just yet. But if you want to get on the list, you totally can. I'm not going to be signing anyone up for my other Substack. This is something that's going to be a unique standalone. And yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. So I hope you guys like that. Shannon says, Carlin, the next total solar eclipse happens next year in your month of narcissism. Wow. Wow. Well, we'll look forward to that, Shannon. I really do appreciate it. Reagan says I look like a detective in that image. I selected that one because I felt like it had the right amount of disdain. Like, I can't even believe that this is happening right now. But I thought it turned out great. Isn't it cool? I used a new AI art technique that I just learned today to make that image. I was really happy with it. Naruti said, Carlin definitely wasn't awake at 3 a.m. because she was high. I wasn't high. I was awake at 3 a.m. because I was working. Anyway, guys, that's what's going on. Now we have come to the point where we need to actually start, watching stuff because we got a lot of stuff to watch. So let's get set up here. And again, if you just joined us, we are watching testimony from the Texas House of Representatives. This occurred about 9 days ago, and this is testimony both in favor of and against the bill in Texas to ban gender modification surgery on minors. So you're going to hear people on both sides of the aisle. You're going to hear the questioning that's going to happen. I really want people to be paying attention and want you to be like taking notes about what arguments are effective and what counter arguments you can expect to encounter from radical leftists who want to, castrate your kids and all that good stuff. So let's get started. And guys, please mount that like button for me. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Let's get this party started. And I don't think
will come to order.
People who like there to be captions. I don't think that there are. Oh, I need to set up the sound different. Need to make sure the sound is coming through my headphones.
Present.
This is what
Collier.
a professional.
Present. Jaton.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Oliverson.
Here.
Smith. Tinderholt.
Present.
Price.
Here. A quorum is present. We will resume testimony on the bill. The chair calls back up Dr.
Thank
Jessica
you, American
Zwiener.
Legend.
Dr. Zwiener, if you would be so kind as to state your name, that you are representing yourself in your position.
My name is Dr. Jessica Zwiener. I'm representing myself. I am opposed to this bill.
She's
Thank
a crazy person. Let me know how the sound is, guys.
Dr. Alverson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Zwiener, I truly appreciate you hanging around, and I know it's important to you, and so I'm glad you're here, and just wanted to finish our conversation. So first of all, you had mentioned before the break, we were talking about some studies, and you had mentioned the Turban had published 2 studies. And I just wanted to ask you if you were aware that there are some strong criticisms of those 2 studies based on the fact that what the study actually said is that it reduced the incidence of suicidal thoughts, but it had 0 effect or not a statistically significant effect on reducing suicidal behavior. In other words, patients self-reported that they felt less suicidal, but there was 0 change in terms of whether or not it actually prevented suicide.
I hope everything
you
is going
familiar
well,
with that?
Divinity.
Yes, it's
And
also
that was consistent with both of the studies, that there was that same methodological flaw.
it's difficult to assess the rate of completed suicide in people who have already completed the act of suicide. They cannot answer questions in a survey.
Well, of course they can't, but it'd be pretty easy to find that data if you were really looking for it. I mean, because there would be records, there are death records, right? So, I mean, if you were already following somebody, I feel like it's, and this is kind of the thing I wanted to explore with you a little bit more, is that we do recognize that we're treating a mental illness condition. And I don't mean any disrespect to anyone who identifies as transgender by calling it a mental illness or a mental condition, because I think you and I would both agree that it's not a physical issue like diabetes or high blood pressure. This has to do with a person's perception of themselves and how that affects their mental state, right? You would agree?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me like we're prescribing a medical therapy and potentially even surgical therapy to treat a mental illness. Would you agree that that's kind of what we're doing here?
I would agree that we don't currently know the biological basis for what makes somebody transgender. Currently,
What?
all we know is that it is in someone's perception of how they see themselves. But yes, we do treat that with physical medications because that's the treatment that works.
Which is unusual, right? You would recognize.
Yes.
We don't know the biological basis for what makes someone transgender. Can we just think about that for a second? Because these people, I have no problem with trans people. Okay. I want to be very clear about this. I have to repeat this over and over again, but I need to be clear. It makes no difference to me at all if an adult decides to transition after having given it a lot of thought. It's their life, it's their body. I hope that they don't regret it. I really don't. Some of them do, and that's not a good thing. But it makes no difference to me. I don't care if someone is trans. I will do my best to respect the pronouns. I want them to live a long and happy life. However, why are we sterilizing children when you don't know what the biological basis for being transgender is? If you don't understand the biological basis for something, can we all just acknowledge that perhaps pumping the brakes and making sure that it is a thoroughly thought through decision that happens perhaps a little bit later in life would be a much more controlled reaction? You don't understand the biological basis for something, and on that point, you're going to sterilize someone when their brain is not fully developed to even know what they're doing? Kind of seems like malpractice to me.
That we don't typically treat schizophrenia with diabetes medications or
Correct.
depression. We don't typically treat that with antihypertensives.
Mhm.
Okay, so that is a little bit unusual. The other thing is that when a person, and I want to talk specifically about WPATH. I assume you know the WPATH standards pretty well. So when a person presents with gender dysphoria, or what you perceive to be gender dysphoria, how do you make that diagnosis? What is the thing? What is the criteria in gender affirming care? How do they ascertain that a child, in fact, has, gender dysphoria?
So for the younger kids, that's done by a psychologist or a therapist, somebody who has more training with those small children.
Okay.
For my teenagers, I follow the DSM-5 criteria.
Okay. And is it true that the WPATH standard would state that, and this may be a better question for a psychologist, so I totally get it if you don't know the answer to this, but that the WPATH would state that a child's self-perception essentially is the rate determining factor as far as determining whether treatment is indicated. In other words, you're not checking blood pressure, heart rate, weight, height. There's no lab test that you can order. It's basically whatever the child says is happening internally. That's your best window into what's happening, right? Whatever the child says.
Just like with every other mental health condition, yes. There's not a blood test for depression or for anxiety. It's all based on what the patient reports to you in their history.
Well, agreed, right. No, I would understand. I understand that. But I think when we're talking about anxiety and we're talking about depression, there are other somatic things that can go along with that. But that's not really what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, how often in this process are we depending our diagnosis on what the child says? An 11-year-old says, I feel like I'm born in the wrong body. Is that sufficient to make the diagnosis of gender dysphoria?
If an 11-year-old comes to you and says once that they feel like they're born in the wrong body, that's not sufficient to make the diagnosis.
So what other criteria would you have to have in order to make that diagnosis?
This has to persist for at least 6 months, has to cause significant clinical impairment or trouble with functioning, and it has to be something that a mental health professional agrees with, and that there's not.
I'm going to ask the same question to the mental health professionals, because I understand that is a little
they'll have a
outside
better
your
answer,
area of expertise. Have you ever, last question I want to ask, have you ever had a child or a young adult? Well, first of all, how long do you follow these folks? Like, what's the longest someone's been a patient? How old?
I started my clinic in 2017, and I still have some of those patients.
So what's the maximum age range? What's your oldest patient? How old are they?
My oldest patient's about 75.
Your oldest patient is 75.
Yes, I treat children and adults.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm
Adolescents.
sorry. Let me be more specific. What is your oldest patient that you saw as a child?
18.
Okay. So you have been following them since 18. I guess.
When I start children, adolescents on hormones, they generally start when they're 16 or 17.
Gotcha.
And then
And have you had any detransitions in your clinic?
I have had 5 patients report detransition. None of them were minors. One of them told me that they wanted to stop taking hormones, and then they continued with therapy for a few months and said, nope, I just needed a break. And 3 years later, now they are still on hormones. And then my other 4 were adult transgender women who all stopped specifically due to discrimination, stigma,
Oh, come
Um,
on.
inability to find work, inability to
My God.
preserve their marriage or continue in their church or have contact with their children.
Okay. So, and I don't mean to be crass, but I'm just trying to understand. So you said they were adult. When you say you said trans, are we talking about somebody who was born as a male who transitioned to female?
Yes.
Okay. And so they were in a married relationship, and as a result of
I have
that
something stuck in my
relationship
eye that
falling
I
apart,
can't
they
get
wanted to
out.
go
That's
back
what's
to
going
being
on.
a
I'm like
man?
trying to get it out of my eye.
Not as a result of the relationship. In general, when I see this very frequently with my adult patients, when you are a little bit further in life, you have more attachments. You may have a career, you have a family, you have long-standing friendships with people. When you transition, it can be a lot more tricky. You have a lot more people who can have opinions about what you are doing and if it's the right thing or the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And particularly if you are self-employed or you rely on just good PR or something to get business. You know, if word gets out that this person is transgender, sometimes all your business dries up. And people, I mean, the point of transition is to be happy.
Yeah.
And some people decide that living in the gender that they want to live in is not worth losing their financial stability, losing their friends, losing their church, losing their family.
So they make a decision to go the other way?
Mhm.
Okay.
Sometimes they come back. if
And
they're in a-
do you provide those services as well?
Of course.
So you help people detransition? How do you do that?
It's pretty straightforward. You just stop hormones. And then what I normally do is I'll check a blood test a couple months later to see if their body's making their own sex hormones again. If they are, then great. If they have any other questions, anything else that they need from me, I'm happy to provide services or referrals or anything like that. If they're not producing their own hormones, then we
Yeah.
usually start hormone replacement.
Okay, so that does happen.
Mhm.
Okay, and because I had read that sometimes you can, essentially permanently suppress the, I think we call it you're the endocrinologist, but I think it's the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, right?
Mhm.
Right, so that can be permanently suppressed
Yes.
in some individuals. Okay, all right. Okay, Dr. Zwiener, I appreciate you being here today, and I hope this wasn't too hard on you, but I'm glad you're here. So
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Mhm.
Who's next?
Representative Jones.
I have one question for you.
Would I go back to walk away if it supported leaving both parties behind? This is an interesting question, which is why I interrupted to consider it. I don't know. I really don't know. Because half of the reason that I completely cut ties with Walkaway is because I do think it has just become an operation to shill for conservatives. I think that they lied every single time that they said that Walkaway is a journey, not a destination. I took that seriously when they said that. But it turns out that they really only wanted to shill people to join the conservative right because that's where they raise all their money. There was a thought at one point with Walkaway, and it was on the election day in 2020. There was this conversation that was had that maybe walk away should be about leaving both parties, leaving the extremes of both parties. But that thought was quickly abandoned when they realized that all of their money and their funding came from conservatives. But the larger issue I have with walkaway is, and that is a pretty big issue to me. The fact that you are going to lie to people to support a political tribe that, quite frankly, is no different than the one you just left. That's a pretty big barrier. So I would be likely to consider it, except that Brandon Straka has shown absolutely zero personal integrity when it comes to dealing with me. I never questioned Brandon. I did whatever Brandon asked me to do. I was always there when he needed it. And he, quite frankly, allowed his best friend to smear me on the internet and to dox my friends for months on end, to defame me publicly over and over and over again, to make my friend's life a living hell when he did nothing wrong and he has already suffered enough. So the absolute lack of personal integrity that I have seen on the part of Brandon Straka, he is a piece of shit, garbage human being, so far as I'm concerned. And I suppose he could have a revelation someday about all of the chaos that he caused by simply, quite frankly, aligning with the wrong person, because Mike Harlow is also a walking piece of human garbage. And the fact that Brandon could have at any point said to Mike Harlow, cut this shit out. That is literally all that would have been required, is for Brandon to say to that asshole, cut this shit out. And that would have been done. But no, Brandon allowed me to be smeared. Brandon allowed my friends to be doxxed. Brandon allowed this shit to go on for months and months and months ad nauseum. Never did anything about it. Never said anything to me. And this was after I did everything I could for that asshole for over a year. So perhaps if there was some sort of mea culpa and apology and acknowledgement of what was done to me and my loved ones after I was always there for him, maybe. If there was some sort of change in direction for the organization so that it wasn't just about trying to get people to leave the Democrats to join the Republicans. Maybe. But it would take an awful lot. But I do appreciate you asking me the question, because you gave me a chance to respond to it. And it looks like people in the chat agree with me. VT Num says Walkaway treated you like shit. Reagan said I wouldn't trust the leaders of that organization. Jan says Brandon is a huge disappointment. Sin says Brandon is a disappointment. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And I'm sorry if that disappoints people. But one of the reasons that I don't want to work with any organizations in this space, that I want to be completely funded by a grassroots army of people, that I want to just like work for you guys and not have anything to do with this political bullshit, is I've seen how the sausage is made. And I've seen how little these people care about anything they claim to care about. It's all bullshit. It's all smoke and mirrors. And I wish that wasn't the way it was, but it is. Lillian, we're going to be getting back to the good stuff in a minute here. I'm sorry you walked right into something you didn't understand the context of. I totally understand, but we're going to be going back to the hearing now. I apologize for this is kind of how my streams work. I talk with the chat during my streams, but we'll get back to the main issue. Let's keep going.
Yes, ma'am. Earlier, before we broke to go on the House floor, there were some discussions you were asked about why is it complex to define what a woman is. So I have a question for you.
Mhm.
I had a friend who was born with doctors couldn't figure out and parents couldn't figure out
That's one of
so-
the lesbians, by the way.
was
She's a
born,
problem.
I think you're called intersex with
This woman right
what
here
they
is a
thought was a
problem,
penis
and
and
this
a
one on the
vagina.
other side is the other lesbian.
Parents picked,
The lesbians are
boy.
flanking the room.
person grew into maturity. The penis didn't get any bigger, and she presented as a woman. So basically, her parents picked wrong.
Mhm.
As a consequence, she had to go into surgery to have. She identified as a woman.
Mhm.
She grew breasts, small breasts, but breasts nonetheless. But she considered herself a woman. Would you? And ultimately had the penis cut off. Whatever it is you do, I don't know what you do. But is that what you meant? Was that an example of what you meant, that it's complex to define what a woman is?
It can be. And I think it's important to distinguish between biological sex and gender identity. So biological sex, for most people, you're a man or a woman. You know, if you have XY chromosomes, you make testosterone, you have a penis and testes, you're male. If you are XX, you have a uterus, ovaries, vulva, you're female. Intersex folks, it's not common, but it does happen. And that's when you're some combination of those things. They don't line up. Then we also have gender identity on top of that, which is how you personally identify what your brain thinks of your gender as.
So are you saying that the definition of a woman isn't just what you're born with?
Correct.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Chair recognizes that Representative Shalonda Jones, Representative Campos, Representative Vinton Jones, and Representative Smith are now present. Anybody else with questions, members? All righty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair calls Luis Sapper. You'll state your name for me, who you represent, and your position on the measure.
Good afternoon, Chair Click, members of the committee. My name is Lior Sapir. I'm a fellow at the Manhattan Institute,
Oh, the
where
Manhattan
my research and
Institute.
writing focuses on pediatric gender medicine in the United States and abroad, both the scientific research and the public policy. Earlier this morning, Representative Oliverson made a claim. He said, by the way, I'm speaking in favor of the bill.
And you're representing yourself?
I'm representing myself.
Thank you.
Representative Oliverson said that if the medical profession cannot or will not regulate itself in the interest of patient health in a particular area of medicine, the state has a right, let me rephrase that, a duty to step in and protect children from professionals who are not doing their professional duty. So what I want to do in the time that I have is I want to highlight that the doctor who testified here before me, Dr. Zwiener, actually gives us very compelling evidence for why the state of Texas cannot rely on its own doctors to regulate themselves in this area of medicine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the table 8 of the points that she made. I'm obviously not going to have time to address all of them, but I would urge you to ask me follow-up questions about the points that she made. Those points are, number 1, social transition, which she claimed is, quote, fully reversible. Number 2, puberty blockers, which she also claimed are fully reversible. Number 3, she claimed that puberty blockers resolve gender dysphoria. Number 4, that surgery either doesn't happen at all or at least is not within the standards of care. Number 5, that gender-affirming hormones are known to reduce suicidal ideation and behavior. Number 6, that the Dutch protocol is the best we have and that the 6 months of assessment are required in order for medical practice in this area to be ethical and appropriate. Number 7, that ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, is not a thing. Number 8, that the state of the science is actually quite good. I want to address all of those if I can, but I'm going to start with social transition and the claim that it's fully reversible. This claim is not true. It doesn't stand up to minimal scrutiny. There have been 12 studies to date on the question of persistence and desistance among prepubertal children. 11 of those studies, which were done up until 2022, the last one being in 2013, and I'm happy to provide citations if you'd like, found that the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria desist by adulthood, most of them during the period of adolescence. A reanalysis that was done in 2018, following criticisms of these 11 earlier studies, found that the rate is over 70%. So the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria resolve that dysphoria by themselves without any need for transition. However, a study in 2022 by Christina Olson et al. At Princeton and published in Pediatrics found that 97% of children who were persisted in their gender dysphoria 5 years after they were socially affirmed. So the question is, how do we reconcile the fact that 11 previous studies found that the vast majority of children desist with one study that found that the vast majority of children with gender dysphoria persist? Well, the answer has to do with a very important fact about the Olson study. Because you see, unlike the other previous 11 studies, the children in the Olson study were all socially transitioned. That was a condition of their eligibility to participate in this study. So there's two possible conclusions that you can draw from this. The first is that the clinicians and researchers who were, doing this research, Christina Olson and her colleagues, were remarkably efficient at picking out the, so to speak, true transgender children from among all the children who had trans-like behaviors or desires. That's one possibility. The other possibility, which is far more compelling, is that social transition itself is what caused these kids to persist. And I would submit that the second possibility is the possibility that falls within the principle of clinical research known as equipoise, which is when researchers take a step back from their own biases and assumptions and ask, what am I really observing here? And are my own biases clouding my ability to detect the effect of an intervention? And sure enough, medical authorities in other countries have recognized for decades that social transition is, as the UK's NHS recently put it, and the Cass report recently put it, quote, not a neutral intervention, but an active psychosocial intervention. Meaning, by socially transitioning kids, we vastly increase the likelihood that their gender dysphoria will persist, meaning will not resolve, meaning that they will not come to terms with their own bodies, meaning that they are much more likely to, so to speak, require medicalization. And sure enough, about 60% of the kids in the Olson study were medicalized by the end of it. So you're talking about a huge number of kids, because the study was over 300 children, a huge number of kids who very likely would have desisted if not for the social transition, who are now on medication. So that's on the question of social transition. And I should point out that recently Finland proposed a gender self-identification law, and activists wanted it to apply also to minors under the age of 18. The chief psychiatrist at Finland's Tampere University, who is the country's top expert in pediatric gender care, Dr. Rita Kartu-Kaltiala, said that this is very, very bad practice, precisely because, as she put it, 4 out of 5 kids desist. The Finnish Pediatric Society, which is the equivalent of our American Academy of Pediatrics, wrote a letter to the Finnish parliament telling them, do not extend gender self-identification rights to minors, precisely for this reason. The Finnish Medical Association, which is the counterpart to the American Medical Association, also submitted testimony saying it's not good policy, it's not advisable to allow children to have the legal right to self-identify their gender.
You can't make Kanye images?
To persistence.
That's funny.
So this is just one example of how the medical science shows that what Dr. Zwiener said about social transition being fully reversible is not correct. The medical science shows that what she said is not correct, and that health authorities in other countries have recognized this fact. And I'll finish by saying that in the UK, the National Health Service issued new guidance, new medical practice guidance in October of last year. And in that guidance, the NHS said, for social transition, we discourage social transition in prepubertal children, and even in adolescents, They recommend it only on the basis of a gender dysphoria diagnosis and with informed consent. Why? Precisely because it has what's known as an iatrogenic effect, meaning that the intervention can cause the persistence of the very illness or the very pathology or the very problem that it's trying to resolve. So what Dr. Zwiener said here about social transition is contradicted by the evidence and by health authorities in other countries. And that's just one example of why doctors in this country, and especially in the state of Texas, who practice gender-affirming care, either do not know or do not accurately represent the state of the science. So I'll stop there for any questions.
Representative Alverson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sapir, I appreciate you being here today. Okay, so I want to go back to the whole suicide thing, because this is sort of, I think, one of many issues that gets bandied about by all sides, and I really want to kind of be able to put our arms around this and understand the data better.
Yeah.
So we hear that there is a higher risk of suicide, suicidal thoughts, attempted suicide, completed suicide amongst youth who are identified as transgender than the general population. So first of all, is that true? And if it is, can you explain why that is the case?
Okay, thank you. This is a very complicated question. Here's what I would say. The evidence shows that minors who currently, and that's a very important qualification, who currently identify as transgender are at higher risk for suicide and at higher risk for suicidal ideation. What the evidence does not show us is why they are at higher risk, and it certainly does not show us that medical transition reduces that risk. Okay, so let me kind of walk through some basic facts about the suicide issue. So just starting with some empirical numbers, a study in the United Kingdom, this is Michael Biggs' 2022 study on youth, clinically referred youth at the UK's Tavistock Clinic, found that between 2010 and 2020, so very recently, a period spanning an entire decade, the suicide rate among clinically referred youth to the UK Gender Identity Development Service was 0.03%. I just want to correct the record. It was earlier said 0.3. It's 0.03. Or 4 deaths out of 15,000 clinically referred children. And by the way, 2 of those kids were already receiving gender-affirming medical interventions. So, you know, obviously every single death is a tragedy, of course. But the idea that kids who identify as transgender are at imminent risk of suicide if they don't get medication doesn't stand up to scrutiny. In the United States, we don't have data on gender-related suicides, but what we do know is that in the period of time before 2009, which is when hormones began to be offered here in the United States, we did not see wave after wave of teenagers killing themselves because they didn't have access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. We didn't see that. And Dr. Zwiener said that, you know, these kids have always existed. They're just, presumably they're just coming out of the closet now because they feel more comfortable. If that's true, and if you look at the fact that between 2% and 9.2%, depending on which studies you're looking at, the 9.2% is taken from Kidd et al. It's a peer-reviewed medical research study on kids in the Pittsburgh school district now identify as transgender. Between 2 and 9%, you would think if these kids, if that rate of teenagers always identified as transgender, you would think that we would have noticed an epidemic of suicides before gender-affirming hormones became available. But nobody has ever noted anything like that. There's zero evidence that anything like that ever happened. In fact, the rates of suicidal behavior and completed suicide over the last decade, since gender-affirming hormonal interventions were rolled out, has increased so much that the CDC recently issued a new report saying what we all intuitively know to be the case, which is that the state of mental health among teenagers and especially female teenagers is in a state of collapse. Okay, so we do have some evidence, I should point out, that medical sex changes do not reduce suicide. There's a study from 2011 in Sweden, a country known for harboring very pro-LGBT attitudes, that showed that adults after transitioning were still 19 times more likely to kill themselves, to commit suicide, compared to age-matched controls in the general population. And I should point out, that is not evidence, this is sometimes misinterpreted as evidence that gender-affirming care causes suicide. It does. That's not evidence that this happens. But it is evidence, or at least it suggests that these treatments do not reduce the actual chances of suicide. Okay, so as I said before, it's true that minors who identify as transgender are likely to have more suicidality, meaning more suicidal ideation, gestures. Suicidality is not the same thing as suicide. Those two terms should not be confused. But here's the crucial point. Studies from the United States, United Kingdom, Finland, Sweden, Canada, and most recently the Norwegian health authorities have all shown that adolescents presenting with gender-related distress over the last decade have extremely high rates of comorbid psychiatric diagnoses. And that in the vast majority of these cases, the psychiatric diagnoses predate the onset of gender issues. Okay, so in the United States, over 70% of youth referred to gender clinics were found to have at least one pre-existing psychiatric diagnosis. This is from Tracy Becerra-Kulke et al., a paper published in Pediatrics in 2018. Now, what's important is that these underlying and unresolved mental health problems are themselves known proxies, known predictors of suicidal behavior. So it's possible, and in fact likely, that teenagers who already have poor mental health, who already have suicidal tendencies, are gravitating towards a trans identity rather than kids who are already trans are suicidal because they're trans. In 2019, a group of researchers decided to test
I'm
this
glad to hear that,
hypothesis.
Dragon Water.
They published research on gender dysphoric youth in Canada, in the UK, and then in the United States. They compared trans-identified kids to kids who were not trans-identified, but had similar mental health comorbid conditions, right? So you take one kid for every kid you have with gender dysphoria and depression, you compare that to one kid who doesn't have gender dysphoria, but also does have depression. And what the study found is that the disparity in suicidal ideation and behavior, the disparity between trans kids and non-trans kids reduced almost to the point of insignificance. Meaning this further confirms that the high rates of suicidal ideation behavior among trans-identified youth are not because of the trans identity, and therefore they cannot be resolved by medical transition. The problem is that by assuming that gender identity is the source of the suicidality and that medical transition is the only solution, we're missing the bigger picture here, which is the collapse of mental health among teenagers and teenage girls in particular over the last 10 years. So we're misdiagnosing the problem.
Okay.
And it's no coincidence, I would point out, that teenage girls are the demographic that represents 2/3 to 3/4 of all referrals to pediatric gender clinics in the past decade. I do want to mention one more point, if that's okay. It's not just that the transition or suicide narrative has no evidence whatsoever. The problem is even worse, because that narrative itself has been linked by the CDC and by transgender and LGBT advocacy organizations to suicidal behavior, meaning suicide and suicide-related behaviors are known to be socially contagious. We know this through research over decades. The CDC has guidelines on how to discuss suicide in a responsible way. And what these guidelines say, they caution against, quote, presenting simplistic explanations for suicide, because suicide is, quote, never the result of a single factor or event, but rather the result of a complex interaction of many factors and usually involves a history of psychosocial problems. In 2017, a document titled Talking About Suicide in LGBT Population, published and co-sponsored by the Movement Advancement Project, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Human Rights Campaign, GLSEN, the Trevor Project,
Fucking
GLAAD,
GLSEN,
PFLAG,
Trevor
the
Project.
Transgender Law Center, SAGE, the Center for American Progress, and the National
I got you,
LGBTQ
Dragon
Task
Water.
Force said this, and I'm quoting, "Do not attribute a suicide death to a single factor, such as bullying or discrimination, or say that a specific anti-LGBT law or policy will cause suicide. Suicide deaths are almost always the result of multiple overlapping causes, including mental health issues that might not have been recognized or treated. Linking suicide directly to external factors like bullying, discrimination, or anti-LGBT laws can normalize suicide by suggesting that it is a natural reaction to such experiences or laws."
I appreciate that. And so one more question for you, and then I know there's other members who want to ask you some questions too, but you sort of glanced on it. I got kind of a grimace when we were talking earlier about this rapid onset gender dysphoria and the change. And you kind of said in your opening thing that was something you wanted to talk about. So, I mean, I think that's really bizarre that all of a sudden you have this complete reversal and then it just keeps on going. It's not just like there was 100% switch. It's like suddenly girls outnumbered boys and then it just kept going. Right. And it's really weird. So can you explain to me, what does the literature say, or what do we know scientifically about this whole, I guess they call it rapid onset gender dysphoria?
Okay.
Is that a real thing?
Yes. Okay. So because this was also addressed by Dr. Zwiener, I do want to address it as well.
This guy is doing a great job.
So up until the late 2000s,
this guy needs to go on a speaking tour or something.
Referrals to pediatric gender clinics were extremely rare. And the vast majority of kids referred were boys, natal boys, whose onset of symptoms of gender dysphoria began usually in toddlerhood, sometimes a little bit later, but definitely before puberty. By the mid-2010s, that had completely flipped, so that now the vast majority of referrals to pediatric gender clinics, including here in the United States, and we have data backing that up, are teenage girls with no history of gender dysphoria before puberty, and meaning adolescent onset of symptoms. Many of them, not all, but many of them have what's known as sudden or rapid onset, meaning that it occurred quite suddenly and out of the blue. And maybe most importantly, the vast majority of them have extraordinarily high rates of comorbid psychiatric diagnoses. Okay, so that's the clinical cohort we're talking about when we're talking about ROGD. Teenagers, especially, but not only females, adolescent onset of symptoms, and comorbid mental health problems. Okay, let me read off some because Dr. Zwiener said that it's just a hypothesis. It was proposed in a highly flawed.
She said there was one study.
Right.
Are there more than one study?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Highly flawed study by Lisa Littman in 2018, and therefore we don't have to take it seriously. Okay, let me read off some citations from medical journals, just so that you see that this is a problem that's happening not just here in our clinics, but across all countries that have pediatric gender clinics. Okay, first citation, DeVries et al. 2020, published in Pediatrics, that's an American journal. However, authors, quote, authors of case histories and a parent report study warrant that gender identity development is diverse and a new development pathway is proposed involving youth with post-puberty, adolescent onset transgender histories. These youth did not yet participate in the early evaluation studies. Okay, so it's a new cohort. The UK Gender Clinic, the citation is Hutchinson et al. 2020, published in Archives of Sexual Behavior. Quote, while some of us have informally tended towards describing the phenomenon we witness as adolescent onset gender dysphoria, that is, without any notable symptom history prior to or during the early stages of puberty, certainly nothing of clinical significance, Littman's description resonates with our clinical experiences from within the consulting room. So these are clinicians in the UK confirming in peer-reviewed medical research that what Littman said in 2018 resonates with their clinical experience. De Graaf et al. 2018 Archives of Sexual Behavior, quote, the steep increase in birth-assigned females seeking help from gender services across the age range highlights an emerging phenomenon. It is important to follow birth-assigned females' trajectories to better understand the changing clinical presentations in gender-diverse children and adolescents, and to monitor the influence of social and cultural factors that impact on their psychological well-being. I have other quotes I'm happy to give from the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, and Canada, where researchers said, yes, what Littman described in her 2018
this guy's pretty great.
Study absolutely conforms to what we've been seeing dominating our clinics over the last few years.
And so, I mean, I think as I was watching testimony on this before, the argument was made with respect to this issue that, well, it's only because
not on the stream, just in
people
general.
are more comfortable to be who they are. And that's why we've seen this massive explosion of adolescent girls. Is that, I mean, can you critique that statement?
Yeah.
Is that factual, or does that make sense, or does that comport with the literature?
It does not comport with the literature. It does not make sense to me, and I'll tell you why. if the rise of transgender identification among youth over the last 10 years, sometimes we hear the analogy to left-handedness, right? That left-handedness increased 300% over the course of a few decades, but this is not because of a social contagion of left-handedness. It's because school teachers no longer
Wouldn't that
forbade
be
students
nice,
from writing with their
James
left hand,
Jones?
right? So these people were always left-handed, but they were now just allowed to be who they really are. So that's the analogy that's given, and that's the way that people on the other side explain away ROGD. There's no way that that's convincing, and here's why. The rise in left-handedness was 300% over 60 years, between 1900 and 1960. Within the last decade alone, when we're talking about gender dysphoria, the UK recorded a rise.
Hang on. Lillian, thank you for stopping by. We might do a couple more of these streams, but of course, you're welcome to share. We're going to be going for a couple more hours tonight, but we're not going to watch this whole thing tonight because there's like 9 hours on this video. So we're going to be doing a couple more of these. I hope to see you at one in the future, and I really appreciate you subscribing for the channel. Matt Walsh is a goddamn psychopath. I'm sorry. Matt Walsh is doing way more harm than he is doing good. Matt Walsh is convincing exactly 0 people to change their mind. All Matt Walsh is doing is preaching to the choir. This guy can speak to people on the left. This guy is going to be able to talk to moms who are like centrist, moderate Democrats to make them understand why what they're doing is not okay and why they shouldn't listen to the doctors that are trying to pressure them into transitioning their kids' gender. This guy can do that. Matt Walsh will never, ever, 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 ever do that. In fact, Matt Walsh will push those mothers into the loving open arms of the doctors who are trying to perform surgery on their children. So no, this guy and Matt Walsh are not equal. Thank you, Kino. I appreciate that.
Rise of 4,400% in referrals to its GIDS clinic at the Tavistock. That's between 2009 and 2018.
4,000?
4,400% increase. And that's in less than a decade. So you're talking about 300% over 60 years versus 4,400% in 9 years. We've seen the same steep increase in trans identification here in the United States. The DSM-5 lists the rate of gender dysphoria in the general population as being between 0.002 and 0.014%.
I would like you to give me an example of one single person on the left. I'm going to say this again because you're going to ignore the parameters. I want one example of one single person on the left that Matt Walsh has ever woken up. One example of one person. Should be easy, right? Matt Walsh has an audience of millions and millions of people. Matt Walsh has more financial backing than almost any other person out there talking about this issue. It should be absolutely no problem for you to name me one single name of one person that Matt Walsh has woken up from the left. And I'm not talking about someone else and Matt Walsh. I'm talking about Matt Walsh himself. This is what you guys don't want to face. Matt Walsh turns people off. Matt Walsh makes people dig their heels in. Matt Walsh doesn't fucking listen. Matt Walsh steals other people's work and claims it as his own. And I'm going to bet you all the money in my bank account that you cannot name me one single person that Matt Walsh has ever woken up. Yeah, well, the problem, Betsy, is that no one saw that movie that didn't already agree with it. So what is a woman? Changed exactly 0 minds. 0. None. Because the only people who saw it are people who paid the Daily Wire money, which means they already agreed with it. Exactly. Matt Walsh is not trying to convince anyone to wake up, and therefore Matt Walsh is a detriment. Matt Walsh hurts all of us. He does nothing except use this issue and use all of you to make money and to maintain his status. That is Matt Walsh's only game, is to make money and maintain his status. He doesn't care about winning. He doesn't care about getting voters. He doesn't care about saving children unless they're his own. He doesn't care about any of these things. And until people really start to acknowledge that, you're going to continue to lose, and it will be your own damn fault.
And this is the DSM-5 was published in 2013. Presumably, let's assume that all these people were also trans as kids. Whereas now, what we're seeing based on a Gallup poll from 2022 and the kids study that I mentioned earlier is rates of trans identification of between 2% and 9.2%, depending on the area of the country and the school district. So you're talking about an increase of from 0.002% to 9.2%. That's, I'm not going to do the math very quickly, but that's, you know, many thousands of times what it used to be, again, just a decade ago. And then the final point that I think corroborates the ROGD hypothesis is that if in fact it was the case that more and more kids are coming out as who they really are, and most importantly, who they're always going to be as adults, because that's the justification for medicalizing them, that their trans identity is settled and permanent, it's never going to change. But if that was really the case, we would expect to see a more or less even balance in the sex ratio. We'd expect to see it more or less 50-50, girls and boys. But that's not at all what we're seeing. Data from the United States and every other country with pediatric gender clinics shows that the percentage of
BC
girls,
is pretty
of natal
conservative.
girls
It's
in
a very
these,
conservative
in these
school.
clinics and who identify as trans, although non-binary is fast becoming the biggest category, the percentage identifying as trans.
That's okay. I want to just pause on that. He just said non-binary is becoming by far the biggest category. That should terrify everyone because that's exactly what they want. They don't want kids to transition. They want them to be non-binary. You still have not answered the question. I asked for a name. I asked for something very specific, and then I predicted that you wouldn't listen to what I was asking for, and you predictably didn't listen to what I was asking for because you know you can't answer it. I don't want to hear one more word out of you until you answer me this question by providing me one single name of one single person in the entire world who Matt Walsh has changed the mind of. And if you speak without either providing me that name or acknowledging that you cannot provide me that name, I will block you and you will just be removed entirely. That's the deal. I either want you to give me one single name that Matt Walsh has changed the mind of, or I want you to acknowledge that you cannot give me one single name that Matt Walsh has changed the mind of. That is the next thing I want to hear out of your mouth. If I hear anything other than that, then you can move on and go suck Matt Walsh's cock for all I care.
Is between 2/3 and 3/4. So no, it doesn't make sense to me. If it was a very small increase and evenly distributed across the sexes, I'd be more willing to buy it. But given the numbers that we've seen in such a short period of time across Western countries, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it sounds to me like I mean, I know we don't like to say this, but it sounds to me like a peer pressure mediated kind of thing. Like it's.
Yeah, again, I don't want to suggest that all kids who identify as trans are ROGD. That's not what I'm
Right.
suggesting.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
But I'm saying like when you hear what happened
Right.
at the clinic in Washington University,
Right.
St. Louis,
That's
I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about, right?
All right,
Is that
goodbye.
This person
Have a
observed
nice
people
life.
coming in. They were all about the same age, all female. Turns out they all went to the same school.
People
They knew
always-
each other.
That's right.
Hang on.
Very
Come on, friend
bizarre.
group.
People always think that I'm bluffing when I say I will block them if they do not follow the explicit instruction that I've given them. What they fail to recognize is that this is my channel, this is my house, and if you're going to come in and be disruptive for no good reason, I'm going to show you the door very, very quickly, and I am not fucking around. My patience with conservatives who will not listen and will not acknowledge reality wore out about a year ago. And so I have absolutely no problem blocking them when they're coming into my chat and whining and not listening and not paying attention and not acknowledging reality. It makes no difference from me. Oh yeah, he did demand a debate. Yeah, he did. Well, he can go debate Matt Walsh's dick for all I care. Like, it makes no difference to me. He is no longer with us.
I mean, that's what Lisa Littman found too in her study, that many of these girls were coming out in friend groups, in clusters. We don't have perfect evidence of this. It remains a hypothesis. I've spoken to Lisa Littman. I know she always emphasizes this was a hypothesis. I never meant it to be settled science. I was calling for more research.
But
That is what a good scientist does.
The 4,400% increase, that's not a hypothesis.
No, that's not a hypothesis. So what happened is that she proposed
insane explosion.
Right. So what happened is that she proposed the hypothesis, and then pediatric gender clinics and researchers across the world said, yes, what you're describing comports with what we've been
Probably
seeing
more
over the
well
last
read
few
than Matt
years.
Walsh himself.
So that lends further evidence, further strengthens the ROG hypothesis.
Well, I know I could talk to you forever, but in the interest of time, and I know I got other committee members here that want to ask you some questions too, I just want to say thanks for coming here today, and thank you for being so thorough with us.
Sure.
I feel like
It's
you can get
very
lost in the
important to
weeds, but
separate
I
out
feel like
the
it's
Matt Walsh
really
fanboys
important
from like
to
real functional
understand
human beings.
the science,
Right.
the data. Everybody's,
No
as I said,
shit,
bandying
really?
these things about, but
Right.
That's
very few people
interesting.
get up and actually quote the author, the year. Here's the methodological methods that, the methods that were used. Here's what the results said. I mean, I think that really helps us, and I want to commend you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you for being here. Appreciate the information and your work and your research on this. A moment ago, I heard you say,
Excuse me, it's hard for me to hear you.
yeah, no, I can't hear you very well either over there. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. A moment ago, you said, and I think I'm paraphrasing, that the real problem is the collapse of mental health among youth, particularly girls.
Right.
And then we've heard some of the discussion about some of the research and some of the things that that kind of verify around that. Does any of the research that you've done go to the heart of that as to what, I know we're trying to broad brush here, we're talking about individuals.
Right.
But is there any research that gives us some indication as to what the major cause of the mental health is? Or first of all, what it is?
Yeah.
Is it anxiety, depression?
Yes.
And then do you have any research that shows kind of what the cause of that is?
Right. So what we know based on research on the pediatric gender kind of universe over the last 5 or 6 years is that the most common comorbid psychiatric diagnoses, and this is, the countries that have collected the best data, for example, the UK, they usually it's focused on a small number of diagnoses.
And by the way, I just lost about 20 viewers and I don't even care because I really think, and this is just a general comment, you can feel however you want about it, these Matt Walsh fanboys are going to cause a lot of effing problems. Just in general. Because Matt Walsh is spinning people up to be absolute assholes that are going to drive every single person away, that are going to turn every single person that flipped their vote in 2020 or 2021 in Virginia, they're going to drive them all away. They're going to make them vote Democrat for the rest of their life. And it's all because Matt Walsh is an asshole. And he's teaching his audience to be assholes. And they're not convincing anyone. They're just playing to the base. And so if there are any Matt Walsh fanboys left in this group and you feel the need to come and defend Matt Walsh's honor, I promise you, this is not the right place for you. We're not beholden to this bullshit. We are not bending the knee to Matt fucking Walsh. He is going to single-handedly dig the grave that will be conservative election chances for the rest of your lives, and you guys don't even see what's happening.
Depression, anxiety, eating disorders, ADHD, autism is extremely common. 1/3 of all the kids referred to GIDS had
We
autism.
probably should, but I don't want to watch him is the problem.
And as I said, all of these are independently linked to suicidal ideation and behavior, independent of gender issues. So those are the psychiatric diagnoses. That's what's most common, especially in the ROGD group. In Littman's study, she found all of those diagnoses.
Nope, not at
and
all.
a few others.
Not
but
remotely.
The question of what's causing this that is an open question. Social scientists, social psychologists are studying this question as we speak. People like John Haidt, Jean Twenge have done excellent work on this. So Jean Twenge, for example, has managed to trace quite credibly the crisis of mental health to the advent of the very potent combination of smartphones and social media, which became available to youth roughly in 2007, 2008. And what you see, if you look at charts, you can see that the mental health crisis really starts exactly when teenagers, and especially teenage girls, because they are the ones most negatively impacted, first got their smartphones and their social media. And incidentally, that's also when ROGD started to take off. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Do we have, settled science showing that the two things are related? No. But we don't do settled science here. We do we issue policies on the basis of the best available knowledge.
I mean, if we had, with that time frame, 2008 to present, have we had time really to do the studies that would be necessary to be able to make that determination?
The determination that it's linked to
a particular thing,
Yeah.
if you like. So for particularly the
Yes.
social media.
Right. So the two names that I mentioned, they've been focused on this issue very much. That's not my area of expertise. What's causing the kind of the collapse of mental health among teenage and especially teenage girls? I'm focused more on pediatric gender medicine, but they've done quite good analysis showing that yes, there's a very, very strong link there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Collier.
Oh, thank you so much. Sir, it says that you're a fellow with the Manhattan Institute.
Correct.
Do you live in Texas?
I do not.
No.
Do you provide healthcare to transgender
I do
youth?
not.
Do you have any research projects that you've done on your own?
What do you mean by research projects?
Well, I keep
yeah.
hearing you read
Yes.
about you're reiterating other projects.
Right. So, for example, last year, so one of the most commonly cited articles in support of gender affirming care is an article that was published in Psychology
But
Today.
is it yours? Did you write it?
I'll get to that in 1 second.
I know. I just need a yes or no.
Yes, I wrote it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
So-
all the question. No. That's all.
No, but
No.
He didn't
No, I
even
don't have
explain
anything
what it
else.
was.
okay, but what I just told you.
She asked him like, what research projects have you done? And he's like, I there was this article. She's like, did you write the article? I was like, yes. He didn't even say what the article was. He's like, no. I don't need to know any more than that. I don't need to know what the article was about. What is wrong with these people?
You was
I have
incorrect then.
nothing else for you. Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Wow.
Representative Price.
Thank you, Mr. Superior.
She
Thank
thought
you
she
for
had
your
him and was going to get him to say he hadn't
We've
done any
heard a lot of
research.
questions so far today that have been answered with percentages and statistics and causes and relationships.
Exactly,
all
Mama.
helpful. But a lot of conflicting
Smart people
information
know
even
this.
to this point in the day. One thing I don't think we've heard a lot about, which I don't know if you can answer, but maybe about rates of, for instance, detransition and regret, if any, for individuals who transitioned as minors who are now adults, because we hear a lot about what is happening.
Right.
But what I guess I haven't heard is what's that rate look like if there is one that can
Right.
be articulated, and because I think that could be significant. And so if you have that information,
Sure.
I'd like to hear it.
Yeah. If I may just finish what I was
Yes,
trying to
please.
say.
Sure.
The article in Psychology Today is one of the most commonly cited articles in support of gender affirming care. It's by Jack Turbin, whom Dr. Zwiener cited, and he goes over 16 studies that he claims support gender affirming care. Last year, I wrote a long critical analysis of this Psychology Today article of all 16 studies, showing that not a single one of them actually shows what Jack Turbin says they show. Not a single one of them actually shows any causal evidence, any causal link between hormonal interventions and improved mental health. After I published this article, Psychology Today issued 4 corrections to the article. And in addition,
That's
2
actually
or
pretty
3
impressive.
stealth edits, meaning they changed what Turbin had said, but didn't acknowledge it. And I know that because I saved the original version because I knew that was going to happen. So, one of the leading experts in the country writes this publication full of falsehoods. I come and correct it, and the corrections are accepted. So yes, I have published on this issue, and so let me just put that on the record. Okay, on the question of regret and detransition, The only honest answer to the question of how common regret and detransition are is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because anytime you hear somebody citing numbers like 1%, 2%, we heard that in the Senate last week, those numbers are based on studies that were done on adults who transitioned as adults. Or, that's the vast majority of cases, but in a small number of cases, minors who were transitioned under the Dutch protocol. In fact, it is the Dutch study. The Dutch protocol and the affirmative model of care are very different. And in fact, European health authorities, especially the CAS review and the NHS, have explicitly rejected the affirmative model of care because it lacks adequate safeguards. That's how they put it. It lacks child safeguards. So we cannot say with any confidence that the rate of regret and detransition among teenagers who have been transitioned over the last decade, especially when ROGD and adolescent onset of symptoms have become by far the most common presentation, we cannot say that it's 1 or 2%. That's highly misleading. So the reason we don't know the true rate of regret and detransition is precisely because gender clinics across the West are now seeing the rise of a new clinical presentation.
Because it doesn't help their
adolescent
case.
females with high rates of comorbid mental health problems and no history of gender dysphoria before puberty. However, we do have some reason to believe that rates of regret and detransition will be significantly higher than 1 or 2%. And here's why. First of all, 3 recent studies, which did include patients from the new clinical presentation, found a 10 to 30% rate of regret and detransition. The citations are Christina Roberts et al. 2022, Ruth Hall et al. 2021, and Isabel Boyd et al. 2022. Okay, so already we're starting to see new research emerge showing that the rate of detransition and regret is likely to be much higher than 1 or 2%. And by the way, for any medical treatment, and Dr. Oliverson will correct me if I'm wrong, but for any medical treatment, if you have a 30% rate of false positive, false diagnosis, and inappropriate medical treatment, even if you have 10%, that would be brought to an end immediately.
For real. That's a really good point.
So that's number one. Number two, a study
Especially
in
with
2021, also by Lisa Littman, Littman in that study also said this is not a representative, fully representative study, but this is a hypothesis generating, or at least it's a call for more research. Found that 75% of 100 detransitioners that she interviewed had not reported their decision to detransition to their doctor. 75%, meaning as far as their doctors are concerned, they have no idea if these people detransitioned and regretted their decision.
And we also have to ask, why are 75% of the people who detransition, why aren't they having that conversation with their doctor? Could it be because they know that if they have that conversation with their doctor, that their doctor will try to pressure them to not detransition, and so they just stop talking to them because they don't want to hear it. 75% are just walking away from all of it entirely without consulting the doctor. That to me is very, very telling.
They might even assume that they're perfectly content with their transition, but 3/4 of them were not. So again, we can't make any firm conclusions based on this study, but it does suggest that there is a problem that needs to be examined thoroughly before we allow these medications to take place. And number 3, I think most importantly, the affirmative model of care, which as I said, is very different from the Dutch model. The affirmative model of care, which by the way, a Reuters investigation from last year interviewed clinicians at 18 pediatric gender centers across the United States and found that not one of them, not one clinician said that they were following, and this is almost a direct quote, you should look it up if you don't believe me, not one of them found anything like the months-long mental health assessments required by the Dutch. That's what they found. So that's why when Dr. Zwiener said, yes, the Dutch 6-month-long requirement of mental health assessments is good practice, that's standard, that's what we should be doing. Well, it turns out that American gender clinics are not doing it, which again is the justification for the state of Texas regulating. But the affirmative model of care itself, what it does is it basically says 2 things. Number 1, kids know who they are, and clinicians should follow the child's lead. In the Senate, we had a psychologist last week who was asked, when a kid shows up at your clinic and says, I'm trans, do you believe him? And she said, without missing a beat, yes. Dr. Zwiener said also, I believe my patients in one way or another, right? So the affirmative model does that. The Dutch model does not. It does assessments, exploratory therapy, in order to determine precisely in the era of ROGD whether the gender identity issues are secondary to, meaning caused by, underlying mental health or unresolved problems like history of sexual trauma and abuse and so on and so forth. So that's number one. It assumes that kids know who they are and they have a settled identity from a very, very young age, and they can't get it wrong. Number two, the affirmative model, unlike the Dutch model, uses what's known as the minority stress hypothesis. And that means that if a teenager presents with a complex state of mind with many psychiatric comorbidities, under the minority stress model, a clinician will say, well, this girl has anxiety, depression, eating disorders, ADHD, autism, whatever. That must be because she's really trans, she's not being accepted as trans. Therefore, all these other issues are secondary to that. In fact, Diane Ehrensoft, one of the leading proponents of gender affirming care, in her 2016 book says, gender transition can cure autism. I kid you not. And she
Holy
cites
shit.
zero research for that claim.
Really?
So if you take these two facts together, the fact that they follow the child's lead
Wow.
and that they subsume all comorbid
That's
psychiatric problems under the
nuts.
gender issues, it stands to reason that we're going to get a lot of false positives. We're going to get a lot of kids who are struggling with other issues and who are not going to grow up to be trans and have lifelong acute gender dysphoria being misdiagnosed as gender dysphoric and treated medically on that basis. And so we're likely to see many more kids detransition, many more adults detransition in the years ahead. But that data is going to take time. Yeah.
Representative Tinderholt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today.
Yep.
I'm just going to cut to the chase. Do you think these detransitioners we're talking about should have the tools necessary to go to court to file against these clinics for the
Yes.
abuse they received as a child?
Absolutely.
Would you consider this child abuse either by the medical professional or the parent?
By the parent, no, I do not. And I think that the reason is that parents are themselves misled. For every one mom who is gung-ho about transitioning her kid, there's 9 parents who have been misled by their own doctors using the suicide narrative. So no, I do not think that parents should be criminalized, prosecuted, or anything like that. With regard to providers, whether they are guilty of child abuse is a technical term. I wouldn't apply it so easily here. I would just say they were acting in gross negligence of their ethical duties and duty of care, and that at minimum, their license should be revoked, at minimum.
There's a reason I ask that, because I see the potential for parents to do 2 things. Number one, I think some parents may be misled like they are right now and may do telemedicine and have puberty blockers and different medications shipped in. Do you think the parents should be held accountable for that in any way?
No.
How about if the parent takes them to another state to have the surgery done?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you.
Sure.
Representative Jones.
I got some quick questions.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Lesbian.
So I just want to be clear.
Lesbian
You're not a medical
alert.
doctor, right?
Correct.
You're not a psychiatrist, right?
Correct.
You're not a psychologist, right?
Correct.
You brought up this example about lefties,
About what?
left-handed kids.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
And you threw that out there. Interestingly, my son is a lefty.
Oh,
When he was
well,
in preschool,
that cracks the
and he
case.
was always a lefty since he was born. When he got to preschool, they started making him use his right hand, right? So when you talk about, and he thought something was wrong with him, right? Because at the school that he went to, which by the way, I took him out of that school. And I found myself having serious discussions with the school who made my son believe that something that he wasn't, right? On account of they were experts over me. So I sort of look at that in the same light here. But I think what is extremely curious to me is that you talk about the question about why suicide, how it relates to being trans is not settled.
Right.
Right. Yet you argue that we should do what you say because your opinions on it, like, is dispositive. I'm really struggling with that.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking for an explanation, right? Because I've heard a lot of explanations by you. But I think as a child of a dad who killed himself, that anybody who gets up and says, you know why some people leave letters, leave notes. They tell you why they did it, right? They do. And then some people don't. So to determine why somebody did something when they didn't tell you why they did it, it's offensive to the family of the people who lost their loved one, right? Especially when you use it to support your hypothesis, which is just that, a hypothesis. It's not scientific. And also one other thing I wanted to make sure of, you haven't performed any individual research on your own. Accurate?
What do you mean by research of my?
Have you gone out and have you done your own research? I see you.
You mean on kids with gender dysphoria? No.
All right.
No, that's not the kind of research I do.
Okay, you're a political scientist.
Correct.
PhD.
Correct.
Okay, so that's your doctor.
Correct.
Okay.
No, my doctorate is in transgender civil rights, actually. But yes,
Okay.
I recently pivoted to this issue, which is related. Transgender civil rights.
So you're with
Is
the
that
Manhattan
true?
Institute.
Correct.
Is that a conservative think tank?
We believe in free markets and.
Is it a conservative think tank?
Well, it depends what your definition of conservative, but yes, we are right of center.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're struggling with that answer.
Well, no,
Like
because
it ought to be simple,
people have
like-
different
like-
definitions of conservative, and I
seems
want to
like
know
it ought
what you
to be
mean by it.
simple, like
Yeah.
whether you're a girl or a boy. But another stuff. Thanks.
Touche.
Thanks.
Yes, can I answer, or is this a question? No, okay. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Representative Tinderholt.
I want you to have the opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so a few things. First of all, I certainly don't mean to cause offense. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to try to make accessible the best available scientific research that we have on the question of pediatric gender medicine. On the question of my credentials, it's a totally legitimate question to raise. When my kid is sick, I don't take her to a political scientist. I take her to a doctor. But I would say a few things about this. Number one, the expert opinion of a doctor in evidence-based medicine, EBM, is the lowest tier of the pyramid of evidence. Much higher above are other methods of synthesis of information. And at the very top is the systematic review that Dr. Oliverson mentioned earlier. And every single systematic review of evidence on the suicide question, on the question of the relationship between hormones and suicidal ideation and behavior, every single systematic review of evidence that has examined that question has come back with the exact same answer. The certainty of evidence, the certainty that hormones have a positive effect on reducing suicidality is, quote, very low. And it is not the case that doctors and researchers and medical authorities in the UK, Sweden, Finland, Norway, France, Australia, New Zealand, it is not the case that doctors and medical authorities in these countries don't
9
care
days
if kids
ago.
kill themselves.
The 27th.
They
of March.
absolutely care. But what they're trying to do is to say, these are extreme interventions. They are. And we want to know if we're going to use the suicide issue as a justification for these extreme interventions, we want to know that they actually work. Dr. Zwiener before me cited the two turbine studies from 2020 and 2022, as she put it, the best available that we have. Let me point out a couple of things. For number one, those studies were excluded from the systematic reviews in the UK because they were too low quality to even be taken seriously. The systematic review done by the experts in research methodology at McMaster University did look at the turbine study and found that it was very low quality. Why? Because the study design did not allow for any causal inferences. And I would also point out lastly that if the best available research that we have on the suicide question, according to Dr. Zwiener, started in 2020, but we started giving puberty blockers in 2009, that means that for 11 years, we were giving puberty blockers without good research. That is experimental medicine by definition. And the last thing that I'll say on this is that Recently, Dr. Rita Kaltiala, who again is Finland's top expert on pediatric gender medicine, told the Finnish version of the New York Times, the country's liberal newspaper of note, that the narrative that if you don't give kids hormones, they'll kill themselves is, and I quote, purposeful disinformation. And that's using that narrative is, and I quote again, irresponsible. So again, medical authorities in other countries do not accept that the suicide question is settled on this issue, and to the contrary.
Representative Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, and I'm sure I missed this earlier, but tell me, do we have some type of understanding as to the number of children that fall into the category of gender dysphoria in the United States?
Yes, we do. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips. Actually, yes, I do. Yes, so Reuters is really Reuters published the first of its kind effort to collect data on rates of diagnosis of gender dysphoria over the last 5 years. This was based on information collected by Komodo Health, based on insurance claims. So keep in mind, this potentially dramatically undercounts the true rates of rise in gender dysphoria diagnoses. And what they found, if I can find it, what they found was that between 2017 and 2021, between 2017 and 2020, the number of gender dysphoria diagnoses rose by 20% annually. And then between 2020 and 2021, it rose by 70%. Incidentally, that was the year of the pandemic, COVID, right? Everything was shut down. Kids were on social media a lot more, on the internet. Is it a coincidence that that is the year that we had a 70% spike in the rates of gender dysphoria diagnosis? I don't think so. But yes, the diagnoses have skyrocketed in recent years.
And so do you know what the numbers are?
I can find them if you give me a second, but
Well,
if you don't want to, that's fine
Maybe
too.
that's one of those things that you and I can just talk about.
Yes,
at
yes.
committee time.
I remember off the top of my head, actually, I remember exactly. Over the last 5 years, the number of new gender dysphoria diagnoses that have been added is 121,882. You can fact check me on that. That's from Reuters. 121,882 new diagnoses.
New diagnosis.
New diagnoses.
You know what the
total number?
Oh
Base-
my
yeah, the total number.
God.
No idea. But it's probably quite a bit in excess of that because, again, this is based on insurance claims, and there are other ways to code for gender dysphoria diagnoses.
Wow.
And yeah, so I don't know.
And do you happen to have access to numbers that would show for Texas?
No, I don't know that.
Okay.
Although I believe the Reuters investigation broke it down by state, but it included data for some states, not for all of them.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions, members? All right, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony.
Thanks.
Well done. Well
The chair
done. That guy's
calls
a
Megan Mooney.
champion. Good for him.
Megan Mooney.
121,000.
Dr. Mooney, it shows that you are with the Texas Psychological Association and yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're testifying against the bill.
Yes, ma'am.
Obviously,
please
because
begin your
psychology is
testimony.
woke.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Click, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Megan Mooney. I am here representing myself as well as the Texas Psychological Association in opposition to the bill. I'm a licensed psychologist practicing in Houston, and I have the privilege to serve parents and their children in my practice. I'm an affiliate member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and have been a trauma-focused provider for almost 20 years. It's through this work of focusing on our most vulnerable children, those who've experienced trauma and loss, that I began to also focus on serving LGBTQ+ youth, especially transgender youth. I worked for over a decade at a large outpatient mental health clinic in Houston and headed our trauma program there for many years. Over that time, I began to notice a trend in LGBTQ+ youth being referred regularly to our team for evidence-based services. This observation continued when I then moved to work at a trauma and grief-focused clinic in the Texas Medical Center. I began to read and to learn more about transgender youth specifically, and realized that this pattern I was noticing in my clinical practice was supported by a large number of research studies. Transgender youth experience disproportionate rates of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse as compared to their cisgender and heterosexual peers. The data is becoming clear that these high rates of trauma
Thank you,
are because of
you know.
others' perceptions about a young person's gender identity and expression. In other words, trauma doesn't cause kids to be trans. Being trans causes them to be traumatized by others. What data also seems to suggest is that gender nonconformity is one of the biggest risk factors for predicting harassment and discrimination. Thus, if kids don't look like their peers or how others think that they should, they tend to be harmed more often. HB 1686 seeks to prohibit medical care that has the potential to actually help decrease trauma in youth. And in fact, in 2022, the NCTSN issued a statement that gender-affirming care is trauma-informed care.
This person should have her license taken away, and I'm going to tell you why. There is no evidence to say that any one single factor, regardless of what that factor is, can cause trauma in the general population. Everyone is impacted by things differently. It's about how you process, how you understand, and how you respond to those things. And she is a clinician, a clinical psychologist that is working with children, that is lying to them when she tells them that you are a victim of the world and that your trauma is caused by something happening to you, that it impacts everyone in exactly the same way, because that is just not true. What she should be teaching is how you respond to things, is how you will experience those things. How you perceive something dictates the emotions that you will have about it. Nothing is ever 100%. Nothing ever impacts anyone in the exact same way as it does someone else. God, I hate my own profession because these people don't know what they're talking about. I'm sorry.
Both the Texas Psychological Association and the American Psychological Association support gender-affirming psychological care and psychologists' important role in helping parents make decisions about possible medical care for their children.
In pushing
The role of
parents to make
psychologists
certain
and other mental health
decisions.
professionals in the care of transgender youth includes a careful assessment of DSM-5 criteria for gender dysphoria, with particular attention to a young person and their parents describing insistent, consistent, and persistent gender identity that does not align with sex assigned at birth. Furthermore, psychologists support parents in understanding normal child and adolescent development and provide treatment recommendations for parents to make the best decisions in the best interest of a child's health. Psychologists follow our APA guidelines for practice with transgender youth, which includes a careful and thoughtful process. Our assessment and treatment process is not quick. It may last months, if not years.
Do you guys ever notice that anytime a doctor or a psychologist says, "We went through a careful and thoughtful process," it was neither careful nor thoughtful?
This treatment process, like all others for mental health care of youth, is collaborative and involves considerations of the goals of the young person, as well as their parents, in the context of professional standards of care and evidence of effective therapies. The role of psychologists often includes supporting transgender youth in the context of harassment and discrimination I referenced earlier, as well as helping them manage expectations, anxiety, and dysphoria while assessing for potential suicide risk. We have considerable important data about the mental health benefits of medical interventions, including puberty blockers and hormone treatments for transgender youth who desire to have those treatments. Research has demonstrated that gender-affirming medical care decreases thoughts of suicide and suicide attempts. I do have your citation, Dr. Oliverson. Depression and anxiety, as well as increases self-confidence and improves body image. With appropriate medical care, transgender youth may have a decreased need for therapy and psychotropic medication. In addition to the evidence of the positive mental health impacts of gender-affirming medical care, we also have data about the potential psychological harms of delaying treatment when youth desire it. For example, beginning medical treatments at a later age has been associated with worsening mental health, including increased risk of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and self-harming behaviors. Furthermore, these youth continue to experience gender dysphoria, and this may worsen, which can result in increased or continued reliance on psychotropic medications and therapy, thus requiring a young person who seeks evidence-based gender-affirming medical care to delay it is not a neutral option. It is one that creates increased risk for psychological distress. I urge you to consider what science tells us consistently. Gender-affirming medical care is a recommended evidence-based approach to treat gender dysphoria in youth. It is supported by every major mental health and medical association in this country and is in keeping with my ethics code as a psychologist.
No, it's
To
not.
restrict or prohibit this care will create worsening mental health for a population of young people that are already disproportionately impacted by trauma compared to their peers. At a time when we already have a mental health workforce shortage in our state, I'm concerned that this bill may result in increased demand and lengthier wait times for psychological treatment for an already vulnerable population. TPA and I thus strongly urge you to oppose HB 1686.
Questions, members? Representative Tinderholt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today. Psychiatrist or psychologist.
Psychologist.
So do you assist some of these folks, young children in transition?
I assist in their mental health.
Here's what I would ask. Do you counsel parents that if they don't allow their children to transition, that their children are likely to commit suicide? I hope someone asks her that. Do you counsel parents that if you don't allow your child to transition, that your child is likely to commit suicide?
Health care during transition. That's what
Okay.
you're asking, sir.
So are you supportive of it with the individuals?
I think that's a fair statement in the context of, doing again a careful assessment, collaborating with parents, collaborating with the young person.
So as we go through this, if this bill passes the way that it is, you can continue to do the services you do. They just won't be able to get the medication and they may not be able to get the surgery. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you could continue to emotionally or mentally transition them. Is that's what it sounds like is accurate, correct?
Yeah, I don't think I would use the language to emotionally or mentally transition a young
What would
person,
you
but
say?
I would still be able to practice, which I believe is your question.
But when you practice, would you be assisting them in their goal of transitioning if that's what they wanted?
I assist young people and their parents in their goals that we reach collaboratively. And if this bill is passed and medical interventions are no longer possible, I would not have that option in the state of Texas. So I would work on other mental health treatments to help, try to relieve symptoms of dysphoria, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things.
Would you recommend that they maybe go out of state or do different things if you thought that they really needed it?
I think that would be a question that is better served by legal counsel than a psychologist for that sort of care.
Well, but that's why you're here today, is to tell me what you do, what you would do, how you do. Like, if you believe someone that really needs help, would you recommend them? It wouldn't be illegal in this bill, so would you do it?
If it was not something that would put parents and young people at risk and they were able to get and receive appropriate care elsewhere, that might be an option I would consider.
Well, I think what's happening right now puts them at risk. So I'm going to ask you the same thing I do everybody else.
Yes, sir.
Do you teach?
No, I'm on clinical faculty at Baylor College of Medicine and UT Health Science Center at Houston, but
Baylor,
I don't
really?
teach per se. I occasionally guest lecture.
And one of those at least is public school, correct?
Yes, sir. I receive no
Thanks, Tina.
financial funding from either of those institutions. It's a voluntary clinical appointment at both places.
What's a woman?
So a biological woman or a woman, female, is somebody that generally we would describe as having XX chromosomes, uterus, eggs, vagina.
Okay. Can a man have a baby?
Thank you for circling back to that question. So what I believe I understood your question earlier, right, is a biological man, somebody who has an XY chromosome profile, testes, penis, et cetera, could that person have a baby? And no.
But can any kind of man have a baby? Any at all?
If you're talking about someone who identifies as a transgender man who has the
She's
biological
being smart with how
profile
she's
of
answering these
XX,
questions.
Uterus, eggs,
This is how they
that sort
should
of
be
thing,
answering
that
these
person
questions.
would be able to have a baby. but that's really about gender identity as
Yes,
opposed
he
to
did.
their
Matt Walsh
biological
did
sex, which is how I
steal
understood your question.
from Kelly J.
So
Keene.
you're
Yes,
basically
he
saying
did.
that if someone
Absolutely.
was a female biologically, transitions to what you would call a man, that they can.
Matt Walsh respects biological women so much that Matt Walsh has stolen work from at least 3 biological women that I know personally and claimed it as his own, because Matt Walsh is the great protector of women, to include one of the women that's been fighting against this bullshit longer than Matt Walsh.
And have a baby.
Somebody with XX chromosome profile, uterus, that sort of structure, and identifies as a transgender male, that yes, that person is able to have a baby.
Even with all the medication that's given to them and all the atrophy and all the things that happen because of the medication, they could still have a baby.
Oh, so that is a level of medical detail that I would rather leave to my physician colleagues, if I might.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions.
Yes, sir.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doctor, thank you for being here,
Yes, sir. Thank you.
kind of helping us dig down into this and giving us kind of a ground level view. I appreciate it very much.
I'll do my best.
How long have you been practicing? I missed that.
So I have been licensed in the state of Texas since 2008.
And since that time, have you been, can you give us the parameters of your practice? Is it just children or adults and children? What do you do?
So my primary specialty is children and adolescents. I do see a few young adults and occasionally parents or, adults who maybe I had seen their children before. We've established rapport, that sort of thing.
And can you give us an idea as to what percentage of your practice currently is involved with children who may have some indication of gender dysphoria?
I was trying to make a guess about that this morning, and I think probably right now in my current caseload, maybe 50%, somewhere in that neck of the woods.
Okay. And so I think you were here, and did you hear the information from the previous witness? And I think I'm pronouncing this wrong, Mr. Sapir.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear that testimony?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear what he said about the increase in numbers that some of the research has borne out? In your experience in Houston, has that been your experience? Of course, you've just been practicing since 2008.
Right, yeah, and did a lot of other things also prior to really kind of being known for some of this care. So, and I think that actually speaks to the point of once I became known as somebody who had done a lot of work kind of catching up to speed on research, standards of care, that sort of thing, my referral rate did increase for transgender youth. Because of that reason, families were seeking out people who had information. And so while I can't speak to that specific statistic about the UK center with the 4,000, percent, I think that trend does make some sense in terms of when centers or providers
Alex
become known for
Feinstein
providing
followed that
good
account.
care.
It was
they
the
do
other way
experience
around.
increases in
Alex Stein
referrals.
followed her.
And did you see, when you see someone that presents with what you could think is gender dysphoria, that's a subjective evaluation on your part, is it not? As
No,
opposed to an objective?
No, gender dysphoria has diagnostic criteria laid out in our DSM-5 statistical manual. So I have to meet those criteria to diagnose somebody with gender dysphoria.
And is that information something that you gather from the patient, or is there an objective test of some sort that you can give them to determine that?
There is not a test per se, no, but through interviews with the young person, with their parents, sometimes collateral information from physicians, schools, that sort of thing, maybe other important caregivers in their lives. So it is not just based on a young person telling me, which there was a reference made to my Senate testimony earlier by the previous witness when asked if a young person tells me they're trans, do I believe them? The answer is yes, I believe that that's how they identify. And also I gather a lot of other data from the young person, from their parents, from other important people.
But understandably, and that's just the work that you do, is that you have to rely on what's told you by an individual. There's not some type of objective test that you can give a child and say, oh, you have just.
So There are lots of objective measures that we can check for, like other mental health diagnoses that might be comorbid. So different, child behavior checklists, things like that. So when needed, if I've got a complex diagnostic question and I'm not sure that I can kind of tease that apart objectively through interview, I certainly can give other measures to help me clarify that.
Okay. You heard Mr. Sapir's testimony about the spike in the COVID time period.
Hey guys, I just want to remind everyone, and the listeners are saying, why am I not getting notifications when you're live? So just a reminder, YouTube likes to finagle things on its own. If you want to be subscribed to this channel, please just double check and make sure you are actually subscribed to the channel. If you want to receive notifications, just please double check to make sure you've clicked the bell. And so everything that we can do on our end is working the way it should be. But YouTube frequently unsubscribes people from the channel. They frequently don't send out notifications. I'm really sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. Just know that I go live on this channel regularly at 5 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 5 p.m. And then on Saturdays, I go live at 6 p.m. Occasionally, I do other impromptu streams here and there, but that is my consistent streaming schedule is 5 p.m. Eastern during the week and then 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays because it's my weekend too and I need that extra hour. And so that's when you can expect to find me live. Unless I've posted somewhere that I'm not going live today, which does occasionally happen. Guys, please mount that like button for me if you have not already. We are watching testimony from 9 days ago in the Texas House of Representatives on the bill to ban gender transition surgery in minors.
So sorry, what was that last part, sir?
In the COVID time period, 2020, somewhere in there.
Mhm.
And in your experience, in your practice, did you see that spike for gender dysphoria during that time period?
Specifically tied to COVID, I don't know that I would say that.
Maybe not specifically tied to COVID, but during that
But just
time
sort of in recent years, is that what you're
Yes.
asking? Yeah, I mean, so I think there is a trend in terms of more people telling us that they're trans, right? I think, a lot more information is out there. Kids are learning language to describe some of their experiences. And so I think that it's fair to say numbers of children reporting that to us seems higher, but also there seems to be data that tells us overall that the rates are about the same in terms of like presentation to clinics. And I believe one of my colleagues coming up later today is going to talk a little bit about that data.
Maybe explain that.
Yes, sir.
In your practice, do you ever see children that come in as a part of these? I think the word that was used was clusters. Friend groups. Do you ever have a situation where someone presents with what you believe to be gender dysphoria just based on talking to all the folks that you talk to, but then you find that there's this influence, this peer influence that goes into it?
So clusters, I don't believe was my word, but but what I do think is true is that young people find other like young people, right? So trans young people might well find other trans young people who understand their experiences, just like other young other teenagers of other demographic groups might kind of cluster together. It feels good and it feels comfortable to be around others of your same kind of age and kind of similar experiences.
Sure.
But to the question of do I think they're being influenced by their peers, that has not been my experience. And I would say that, again, through the kinds of questions that I ask, through interviews, through assessment with young people and their parents, that is something I'm attentive to be sure. It's a question I'm asked regularly by parents, as a matter of fact. Oh, my child's friend group, they all seem to be LGBTQ+. Is this them just trying to fit in, that sort of thing? So I certainly am careful and cautious about asking those sorts of questions in an evaluation to make sure that I'm providing an appropriate diagnosis.
Do most children that present with gender dysphoria also present with any other issues, emotional issues?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think yes, right. So data is pretty clear that our trans kids have a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and as I referenced in my testimony, a lot of history of trauma, that they tend to be abused, harassed, et cetera, at school and communities, things like that. So I also, because I'm a trauma-focused person, see higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, those sorts of things as well.
Do you ever have a child that you believe is presents with complaints of gender dysphoria, but that you do not believe should be transitioning?
Not with gender dysphoria, but there are kids who come to me and say, I'm not cisgender, right? Like I don't identify as the sex I was assigned at birth. And I say, okay, well, we need to talk
All
about
right,
this some more,
let's
right?
see
Like
it,
they're not saying
know?
I am this or I am that, and I'm having the kind of clinical distress that would be required for the criteria of gender dysphoria. So yeah, I do have young people that I see that we have a lot more conversation and that actually have never been referred for medical treatments.
Now, have you ever had someone who's received medical treatment to transition
Okay, sounds
that
good.
you believe should not be transitioning?
No, sir. The young people that I've personally had contact with have had really good evaluations and assessments prior to medical treatment if that was done by other providers prior to me.
Okay, so there's never been a time when you said, you know what, I just don't think you ought to be transitioning.
No, sir, not that I can recall in my practice.
Wow.
Now, on
Wow.
the referral sources, you've got word of mouth.
Just think about that for a second. What is the likelihood that every single child who comes to this person for psychological help has 100% correctly diagnosed themselves as a child? I don't think that's a very high likelihood. Yes, she just said that she has never not recommended a child that comes to her clinic transition. She recommends they transition 100% of the time. Let's just do a little replay. People are asking for a replay. That's fine. Let's go back just slightly.
This or I am that, and I'm having the kind of clinical distress that would be required for the criteria of gender dysphoria. So yeah, I do have young people that I see that we have a lot more conversation and that actually have never been referred for medical treatments.
Now, have you ever had someone who's received medical treatment to transition that you believe should not be transitioning?
No, sir. The young people that I've personally had contact with have had really good evaluations and assessments prior to medical treatment if that was done by other providers prior to me.
Okay, so there's never been a time when you said, you know what, I just don't think you ought to be transitioning.
No, sir, not that I can recall in my practice.
Okay. Now, on the referral sources, you've got word of mouth.
Yes, sir.
Right? And by the way, I'm left-handed. I didn't realize I was such a victim.
My grandfather was too.
Absolutely. But on the referral sources, you have word of mouth, but then you have physician referrals.
Yes, sir.
Right? And so you work closely with these physician referrals.
Yes, sir.
Right. And I don't know, I'm just a lawyer, but do we have specialties now in gender issues, gender transition issues?
I don't know about kind of like medical credentialing for specialties. What I would say is that in my practice, the kinds of providers that I work with most are pediatricians, adolescent medicine specialists, endocrinologists. So that tends to be the spectrum, in addition to, of course, psychiatrists, that sort of thing.
And then you have some of these doctors, though, they may be a pediatrician, but they've decided that they're going to specialize in gender transition issues.
That's my understanding.
Okay, and it could be the same way for endocrinologist or any of the other specialties that you named, right?
Thank you,
Like,
Keno. I got
even
the
talking
email.
about myself and my own license,
I'll take a
I'd be
look
a
at
good
it.
example, right? So there's not a specialty within psychology for gender-related care. I'm a general practitioner. I'm a licensed psychologist. We just kind of have that category in the state of Texas. And then there are some specialties, but this is not one of those specialties in the field of psychology. But according to my ethics code, what I have needed to do is go on and do additional research, training, read as much as I can to try to make sure that I'm competent to this practice. So I can't speak whether that's the same sort of criteria for physicians, but I would expect so.
And I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
And not to get too off into your own business, but just so I understand, 50% in connection with this, what percentage comes from referrals?
What kind of referrals?
You said 50% of your practice is in connection with dysphoria.
Yes, I think that's probably about
What
right.
percentage of that comes from physician referral?
Oh, from physician referrals. I don't know. I would be happy to look back at my referrals and get that to you. I would say, if I was going to spitball it with you, maybe half of that half, so maybe a quarter of all of my
Your
clients,
practice? Okay.
maybe. But again, I think that's probably an overestimate, because the more usual procedure is for them to come to me first before they're with physicians. So it might be that a pediatrician has referred them to me, but it's not usually like they've already initiated some sort of treatment for gender-related care before seeing me, if that makes sense.
And in your experience, these doctors who, whether they refer to you or you refer to them, are involved in this area, these guys are becoming more and more specialized in this area. Would you say that's fair? The doctors that you deal with?
I would say the doctors that I work with closely are working very hard on their continuing education, continuing medical education, to make sure that they are up to speed on the kind of data that we have concerns about here today.
But you have doctors who just solely specialize on gender transitioning issues. Wouldn't that be correct?
No, sir, I don't believe so. I think
Or
the
that
ones,
most of their practices?
I think there are certainly ones that's the majority of their practice. I don't think there's any that's the only thing that they do.
I got you. And are these doctors in clinics that handle the majority of their practice in the clinic is in connection with these issues?
I mean, they are all tied to some sort of medical clinic or another.
Right. Okay. Because I remember in the last time we heard this bill that there were several clinics around the state with medical doctors that this is really what they dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, I don't know if you deal with any of those or not, and I'm not going to ask you that. But it's fair to say that since 2007, the business of all this for doctors has grown exponentially to the point where you now have you have a lot of physicians, or you have a number of physicians who the majority of their practice is in connection with gender transition, correct?
I think that's a fair statement. And these are also physicians who do a lot of other things also, or could.
But the majority of their practice may be in connection with this, right?
And I think that's in part because there's so few of them. So the demand and supply issue becomes real for a lot of families seeking this care.
I know, but at the end of the day, what we're talking about is really having a negative, with this legislation, we're going to have a very negative impact on a few doctors, aren't we?
I think the negative impact will be on children and their families.
And the doctors.
I don't.
Will have a negative impact, and that could be the reason why we're seeing some of the testimony here today. Is that correct?
The doctors I work with are not motivated by finances. They're motivated by care for children.
Well,
Oh,
I know
bullshit.
doctors just don't care about money at all. Thank you very much.
Bullshit. Doctors care so little about money that they don't have fancy boats or houses or take like luxurious vacations or have like the most expensive watch ever. They basically are just like normal human beings that mingle with the riffraff and don't have expensive country club memberships at all, because none of them really care about the money. They're not doing it for the money. They're doing it for the people. They were even laughing in the crowd.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair.
That's how bullshit that is.
I'm glad to hear us laughing occasionally in here. That gives me hope for humanity. So, Dr. Mooney, it's great to meet you in person, and I'm glad you're here, and appreciate you bringing some studies and stuff. So, I did want to ask you, with respect to, you said something which I thought was very interesting, and it kind of contradicts, some of what we've already heard. So I wanted to explore it with you a little bit. And that has to do with this concept that essentially the transgender identity is essentially the root cause of other comorbid psychiatric conditions. I thought that's what you said, that essentially a lot of the trauma that people experience is because they're trans. And so once they identify as trans, then their life is traumatized. Is that
So
Let's talk about that.
yes, thank you for asking me to clarify on that. So,
Thank
what I would
you.
say is that what data in
This
the
is what I was
trauma
saying
world
earlier.
suggests is that when children have what's described as a gender nonconforming presentation, so they don't look like somebody thinks they should, that seems to be one of the factors that sets them up to be abused and harassed more than their other peers. Now that, for the record, is not just trans kids. That's other LGBT kids also in the samples that when they don't kind of look like their peers think they should. Look, I work with kids every day. They can be kind of ruthless sometimes. I love them,
Absolutely.
but sometimes, they say kind of mean things to each other. And so that is one of the things that sets them up, especially for school-based bullying and harassment, is peer-based kind of comments, really awful things that other researchers have kind of classified that are said to and about transgender kids at school. So that's one of our big sources of data, is kind of school-based data that's collected by GLSEN every other year, that they kind of tell us the
Boo,
rates of discrimination and
listen.
harassment that kids are facing at school. So that's
Boo.
one of the areas.
So how is that data collected?
They do large surveys of high school kids across the country every other
Okay,
year.
so it's a self-identified, self-reported survey
Yes, sir.
kind of thing again?
Correct.
No control group?
That's
No-
correct.
No, okay. All right, so, okay, and you said you had some studies for me. So when we're talking about
Yes, sir.
this issue of, these comorbid mental health issues arising as a result of someone being transgender, are there studies to back that up?
So you raised an interesting point earlier about causation being one of our problems.
Yeah, because I really want to drill into
Right.
this.
And what I want to be clear about is that being trans does not equate to somebody being mentally ill. That is not what I'm
What?
trying to imply or to communicate here today. What
Hang
I
on,
do think,
hang on. I'm sorry. I don't listen. Having mental health problems is nothing that I think that people should be ashamed of, especially when it's mental health problems that you are quite literally born with. So I'm not trying to shame anyone or anything. However, why can't we acknowledge that if someone is trans, that is indeed an abnormality? Something has not developed in the way it should have developed. That doesn't make that person a bad person. It doesn't mean that person shouldn't be able to live a happy life. It doesn't mean that person is not worthy of care or respect. It doesn't mean any of those things. However, for this person to say that there is no mental health anomaly in the plethora of children that apparently are going to her to be affirmed that they are indeed trans, that to me is a problem.
think that, again, the research I see in trauma literature is that kids who are trans are experiencing worse rates.
We
of
really
being
do need to create a
discriminated
most
against,
wanted list at
harassed,
some point. That's
than their
legit.
peers. And that then sets them up for, it could be, depending on the severity of harassment or discrimination, it could
We
be
should work
post-traumatic
on
stress
that.
disorder, anxiety, depression, et cetera. So there was a reference earlier. I'm sorry, it's getting a little hazy at this point in the day on who
I'm
said
sorry,
things.
too.
But, kind of this idea that we shouldn't just blame this or this or this and say that causes suicide, right? And that's absolutely
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
right? That suicide risk is determined by a complex amount of factors. One thing is bullying and harassment based on gender identity.
Makes sense.
One thing is, that peer victimization that seems to be moderated or moderates effects of already existing depression. So some kids are already sort of naturally depressed, not anything to do with their trans identity. And so that combination does seem to be something that, kind of particularly predicts potential suicidal ideation for young people.
So, I'm going to throw a study back at you. And if you haven't heard of it, that's
God
totally
help me, I've
cool.
got a stack. We'll
Okay,
see what we can
so
do.
the Sarah 2018, looking at this very issue, concluded that 70% of kids who had comorbid mental health issues, that the mental health issues predated any diagnosis or symptomatology affiliated with gender dysphoria.
I certainly can't dispute what was in that study. What I would say is,
Well, I mean, that's really the opposite of what you just said, honestly.
well, no, because what I said was that trauma then does seem to, so PTSD is one of those rare diagnoses we can say has, kind of a
Right.
causal identifying incident or incidents, right? So again, with my lens as being a trauma focused person, that's part of what and how I came to this work is looking at my
Yeah.
kids who'd experienced that kind of harassment. So I had
Mhm.
sort of like causal events in a timeline, and I can look and see, did we already have a gender dysphoria diagnosis prior to that harassment? Did we not? So
Right.
certainly as part of the kind of considerate care I was describing over here earlier, that I want to pay attention to those timelines, right? Did a kid already have symptoms of depression, anxiety, et cetera, that predated any sort of signs of gender identity that doesn't match the sex assigned at birth, or them telling somebody that? I mean, yes, it matters. It's not the only thing that determines my treatment.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, I think it's, I guess what I was trying to get back to is just the idea of, I do think, and this is one of the conundrums that you face in this area of psychology that you're practicing, is that it is very much a chicken or the egg kind of hypothesis, right? It's sometimes difficult to unwind which came first. Was it the comorbid psychiatric conditions, or was it the gender dysphoria? How, in your practice, in your experience, and I know there's good studies on this, but I'm not going to quote data to you. I'm just wondering about your experience. Do you see a higher rate of autism and autism spectrum disorder for your
Good question.
transgender identified youth?
Good
Yes,
question.
and that is definitely
Why is that, do you think?
there are some great studies being done on that right now. John Strang at Children's National in DC is working on trying to understand that. There seem to be some genetic links that might underpin both.
No.
We don't have good understanding of that.
We just learned from that other doctor earlier that they have no idea what biologically causes people to be transgendered. And now this bitch is going to get up and say people who have autism have a higher natural rate of being transgendered. Like there's an innate correlation between being trans and being autistic. No, the innate correlation is that autistic kids are already socially awkward, are easy to take advantage of by adults to, gain more social acceptance. That is the link. It is not that autistic kids are naturally born trans at a higher rate. Wow, I cannot. This is why I think it's important to watch these, and I really want to thank Gabrielle Clark, who was actually there, but she didn't testify. She is there somewhere, because she's the one that suggested we watch this, and I think that this is just one of the best uses of our time because honestly, you just let these people talk. And they say the quiet part out loud. This is why we do so many streams where we just watch long form content. And sometimes we have to sit quietly for a while and we have to listen to a lot of boring stuff and a lot of cringy stuff. But if you just let them talk, they will eventually at some point say the quiet part out loud, and then the entire 18 hours that you just spent listening to all of it suddenly becomes worth it because they said the quiet part out loud. So I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate you guys putting in the time.
Other theories are that sort of the wonderfully creative thinking of autism, people with autism spectrum also allows them to be creative about gender identity.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for you about that, but yes, that certainly holds up in my practice.
And so what other
Wait, so you
comorbid-
mean they're just being creative about their gender identity? I mean, it certainly is true that autists do have a very beautiful creative way of looking at the world, but you're saying that it's not an innate biological thing. They're just expressing their creativity through their gender identity, and you're going to make them permanent medical patients for the rest of their lives because they're expressing their creativity with their gender identity. Guess what? I'm old enough to remember a time where we could dye our hair and wear crazy clothes in high school, and no one tried to medically transition us or cut off perfectly good body parts. As someone who had blue hair in high school more times than I can count.
the mental health? I mean, okay, we've talked about, suicide risk. We've talked about anxiety, depression. What about eating disorders? Is that more common amongst trans youth?
That is certainly in the literature. I have not had that in my practice, which I think you
Okay.
also asked me to address, but yes, I
Yeah.
do see that in the literature as well.
Okay. So one of the things that as we talk about this, and again, I just kind of want to make sure everybody's, get all the facts on the table here. What we all need at the end of the day is a comprehensive worldview of what is known and what is not known, what is thought to be known, and maybe what is assumed to be known that may not be true. The CAS report, in its decision to basically close the Tavistock Clinic, highlighted an issue that is very close to what you and I have been talking about, which is diagnostic overshadowing. And that is the idea that because the mental health issues in this population are so complex, it is difficult to sort out the gender dysphoria issues from the comorbid mental health conditions, and especially as relates to feelings of depression, anxiety, suicide. There are many, many, many other reasons why a child could potentially feel those things. But there seems to be a rush, at least in this country, to sort of shove that all into the drawer of, well, it's because they're trans.
All I can say to that is not my experience in terms of how I operate clinically and the providers that I know.
Okay.
That I don't see a rush to treatment happening here in Texas. I see that the clinicians I work with are very careful and are working very closely with parents to make sure that they are providing as much information as possible for parents to make a good decision for their young person.
Okay. And you said, this sort of last question, and it just sort of occurred to me because I'm looking at the witness list here. You said that about 50% of your practice is in this area of specialty.
Right, it's some sort of gender diversity.
So do you,
yes, sir.
So do you refer patients to
Like
doctors we
where
know?
to go to dinner? Like what you should get?
I don't know that I have referred anybody to Dr. Zwiener. She is certain, like not specifically. What I usually do for my clients is I have a list.
Mama, you know what I would do? This is awful. I'm acknowledging that what I'm about to say is awful and it's not related to the topic at all. Here's what I would do if I was treating myself to a quiet evening by myself. I would get a whole bunch of here is my dream dinner in a land where calories mean nothing and you can do whatever you want and there is no consequence. So I would start with a buffet of my favorite appetizers, because appetizers are usually the best parts of the meal. Whatever ones you like best, just get a little selection of them. It's kind of like when they pass the trays at the cocktail. You can try everything, and that'd be really great. And I just love they're so good. There's so many good appetizers out there. And then I would skip over the dinner portion, because that's the most boring part of the meal, and I would go straight to dessert, and I would get a couple different kinds of cheesecakes or really luxy kind of cake slices or tiramisu or fancy desserts, the really, really good stuff. And I would have a whole meal. Again, this is in a land where calories mean nothing and there are no restrictions and nothing is going to impact you and your weight. I would have a whole meal of just appetizers and dessert, and that's it. Treat yourself. See, I'm a bad influence. I hope you enjoy it, Mama. You deserve it.
List of providers that I know specialize in gender-related care, and so I usually provide that list. And Dr. Zwiener's practice is on that for older adolescents. And
I mean, she seems to be kind of authoritative and very involved. I noticed that you guys have a connection to, I think, Baylor as well.
I think she mentioned UT Health.
Oh, did she say? I'm sorry.
That's okay. But
Okay,
it's a large institution, so I don't think I even knew that till her testimony today.
So how many physicians so you're in the Houston area, she's in the Houston area. So how many physicians do you work with, endocrinologists, as you refer to?
So that's a little bit tricky. There are clinics that have kind of multiple providers in them, and I'm kind of trying to think of how many providers in those clinics right now. So I would say there's
So how many clinics?
I think there's 3 or 4.
3 or 4,
Yes,
and
sir.
they're all in the Harris County,
Yes,
Houston area. Okay. All right, and just. And I'm not trying to be ugly here, but I am curious. I've always been curious. So I know that medical insurance pays for a lot of transitioning services. So I would assume that a and endocrinologist services would be covered. But do they pay for psychology, for like, are your services reimbursed by insurance?
I actually don't accept insurance in my practice.
So you're cash pay?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it, Dr.
She
Mooney,
doesn't
and I
accept
appreciate you. I know you were
insurance?
here for the Senate side too, so thanks for coming back
Wow,
and visiting with us.
Thank you, Dr.
Christ.
Representative Campos?
Yes, I have a question. So all of your patients, are they adolescents that are transitioning or?
No, ma'am.
No, okay, so some of them are maybe not sure whether or not their gender, can you kind of?
Yeah, so again, I'm a general practitioner by training, right? So I see lots of kids and teens for a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't have anything related to do with gender. So that's kind of the other 50% or so on average of my practice. And then even within those who
How many children have gone to this woman for some other problem and had her instead say, guess what? Surprise, you're trans. We don't have any evidence that that's happened so far. Maybe we won't get there. I need to acknowledge that. I could have literally just made that up, but that's the first thing that came to mind. If she's treating kids for a variety of issues, how many people have come to her for something else that she then gently nudged in the direction of trans?
are referred to me for gender related care, not all of them are doing anything medically related or even necessarily kind of, as we talked about earlier, social transition. So some are still figuring out what is, how do they identify, what's the right language to fit, they've got questions and that's part of my role to help them figure that out.
So when they come to you, are they already on medication and going through counseling, or do you get them started on medication? Like, what is your process?
So as I said before, I don't think I'd be hard pressed right this moment to tell you that I have anybody that I am seeing currently or have previously seen that had started, certainly not hormones, maybe some who had started blockers before coming to me. They'd been assessed by a different mental health treatment provider before coming to me, that sort of thing. But so usually the referral is they come to me first for help with evaluation, assessment, treatment before there's a referral made for a physician for possible consultation about medical care.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yes,
Representative Tinderholt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when you do these referrals to these doctors, and I'm going to include any clinic, hospital, doctor, medical professional, are there any fees that change hands because you refer them?
No, sir.
Okay. I just had to ask because I don't know how it works.
I appreciate it. No, sir, never.
Thank you.
Are there questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Karina Khan or Cone.
Guys, I just want to do a time check. We are about 1 hour and 41 minutes into this stream that lasts 8 hours and 44 minutes. I do want to watch for just a little bit longer. I do want to wrap up sometime before like 8:30-ish. Something like that, 8:30-ish. Which I know is not a whole lot of the stream. We still got a lot of the stream to go, but don't worry. We're going to watch some more another day. Maybe we'll watch a little bit tomorrow. I have to decide what we're going to cover tomorrow. But we will make our way slowly but surely through the stream. We just might do some other stuff in between too. So I appreciate you guys hanging out.
Karina, if you could state your name for me, and I understand you're representing.
I'm starting to believe it's very, very important for us to get through the entire stream. Just because, I mean, literally every single testimony has been useful in some way. And so, we're going to work our way through it. We may just take a break and talk about other stuff here and there.
Yourself, is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
And you are for the bill?
I am in support of the bill, yes, ma'am.
And your last name, did I pronounce it correctly?
Cohn, yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Please begin your testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Click and other committee members, my name is Corinna Cohn. I'm here today in support of HB 1686. When I was 15 years old, my psychologist diagnosed me with gender identity disorder,
Oh, it's a
I started taking
detransitioner.
estrogen when I was 18. In 1994, when I was 19, I had sex reassignment surgery. Although I believed I was changing my sex, I now understand fully that any such change is merely cosmetic. This is a realization that every sex-changed child will eventually need to come to terms with in adulthood. Over the past 2 years, I have encouraged Republicans and Democrats to work together on regulating the practice of pediatric gender care. I also make a point of having open and good faith discussions with people who oppose this bill. One thing all of us share is a passion for the welfare of children. I believe that the best outcomes require that all parties come to the table with parents, policy experts, and dissenting doctors and therapists so we can close the major gaps between the evidence and the practice in this field. Those of us here testifying in support watched, unsurprised, as countries such as Sweden, Finland, England, and Norway have brought their practices into alignment with the data. And the result is tight restrictions on clinics who specialize in sex-changing children. Having spoken with opponents of HB 1686, I now realize that our two sides are working within different paradigms. Our side, those in support of this legislation, oppose it on the basis that it is not good medicine, and it's not good medicine because there is no solid evidentiary basis that it's effective. We oppose it because we see a steady flow of young people, irreversibly harmed, tell their stories of how they were neglected by the system. We call these detransitioners. We cannot see eye to eye with our opponents because they were here on the basis that gender-affirming care is a gateway for people to achieve their authentic selves. In fact, this very morning, I joined the clergy who opposed this bill as they gave a prayer, and in it they acknowledged and thanked the Creator for making our bodies fluid. For our opponents, this bill must be stopped because it will delay children from achieving their destinies as members of the opposite sex. I'm sorry to say, but our opponents are misguided. Authenticity is something you discover by living and growing, not by taking hormones or having surgery. Every person in this building has come to this day by trying and failing and learning from their experiences. We cannot protect children from growing up, and the misguided attempts through medicalization will only lead to future pain. It is time for Texas to follow the evidence and for this body to take up its proper mantle as regulator of last resort. Even though you will hear sincere and passionate emotional appeals to oppose this bill, you are our last chance for protecting children. Thank you.
Questions, members? Representative Jones?
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you so much for your testimony. I wanted to ask, just to clarify, as far as, I just want to make sure I'm getting language correct, your transition did not start until 18? Or I guess, could you explain, I know you mentioned 15. Could you explain to me 15, 18?
Yes, around middle school, I came out to my mother and, I'm sorry, a little bit earlier than that, I started having ideations about having a sex change, basically. I wanted to grow up and become a woman. I came out to my mother when I was 15.
I don't think they
And she brought
voted
me
on
back
it
to
yet.
the child psychologist that I had seen when I was 15. And after working with her for several appointments, I was diagnosed with gender identity disorder. And so that would be the point that I first had a clinical diagnosis of being transgender, I guess you would say. We didn't use that language back then, but that's maybe updated for the times.
And then during that time, after you received diagnosis, could you just share a little bit as far as what you're comfortable with, just sharing what happened between that time and between then and to actually becoming an adult?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I testified last week and took it out of this week's. I have a pretty good claim to being one of the first people to find a pathway to transition on the internet. In 1992, before the World Wide Web even existed, I found a community of other similar people to me on a system called IRC, which is a chat channel. And I was somebody who had a pretty difficult time in high school, or any school, I should say, K through 12, making friend groups. And when I was able to get onto a community online, I discovered back then what a lot of young people who are marginalized and excluded discover, which is that there is actually a lot of people out there who will accept you. And I found that there were a number of adults, and keep in mind the community back then was very, very much, we would say male to female transsexuals at the time. But they were generally older, 30s, 40s, or 50s, and they were extremely affirming of me, gave me a lot of support. And to be fair, at that time in my life, I didn't have very much of that in my school or in my home. When I came out to my mother, I hope she's not watching because this is totally different now, but she flipped out. She did. She was dealing with some of her own issues at the time, but I ended up being kicked out when I was 17. And as far as an emotional support network goes, I totally understand why the online community is so important. But what I've come to discover in retrospect is that the people who you meet online don't have any sort of obligations to you. So while it is easy for everybody to be boost other people up very easily and give a lot of affirmation and tell you that you're beautiful, tell you that you're important, if you need them to stop by your house and feed your cat because testimony is running past the time that your flight's supposed to leave, they won't do that. But the people that you actually interact with in real life and become friends with will. So thank you, Aaron and Carrie, for watching my cat tonight.
And before I get to my last question, first and foremost, I want to say, regardless of what side of this issue that you're on, I have a lot of respect for you for getting up and sharing your story, because it's very important for your story to be told. Very much so different sides of this conversation. And so one thing I just wanted to ask you, talk a lot about the influence of the internet. Can you talk a little bit about the influence of parents in this conversation? We hear a lot about parents persuading their children to do this. Could you talk a little bit about that and how did that play off in your life?
In my personal experience, Representative, my father was indifferent. Unfortunately, he was saying, if you wanted to do that, you need to do whatever makes you happy. So I guess he was neutral on the issue, but my mom was very bitterly opposed to it. And I didn't have any family support. It's a little more difficult for me to broaden that to other families. I have heard, of course, I've been part of the community for 30 years, so I've heard all sorts of different stories from people whose parents were affirming and those who weren't. But I think that you'll find the stories across the entire range.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Representative Tinderholt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karina.
Yes.
Brave. I'm going to ask you some sensitive questions. You don't have to answer them.
Please do.
But I want to ask because I think I know some of the answers, but I don't want you to feel obligated to answer them. What's communication within the trans network like in regards to suicide?
Yeah, I agree.
In the last year, the communication that happens in the online communities that I track, which is Twitter and Reddit, there has come to be something of a fever mood about the idea that there's an oncoming genocide that is being conducted by individuals such as yourselves and me. There are accusations that anybody who's taking any position on a policy that's this sensitive, that if they're on the wrong side of it, then they're complicit in the deaths of people. And when it comes to suicide, one of the most common messages that is used in tandem with opposing this class of bills, which I'm here to testify only on a youth medical bill. But there's, of course, a larger spectrum of bills that would affect people who identify as transgender. Regardless of any of those other types of bills that are being discussed, it is very common that in tandem, people are urged to oppose them because they will cause people to commit suicide. I'm sort of on the outs of my community. I do have a couple of people with whom I communicate privately, And I have been trying to persuade people that we should lower the temperature, specifically on that sort of language, because we know from, for example, the Samaritan's Media Guide, that certain types of messaging about suicide can plant ideas about committing suicide. And so it's even for people who oppose this, which, you know, I adore we have this democratic process that people can. I would really ask for everybody on the opposition side to not make a claim that people will commit suicide if they do, because unfortunately, that, from what we know from the research, that seems like it's going to make it more likely that suicides do happen.
Well, when you say my community, I would say that you and even the people on the opposite side are our community, Texans. Regardless of whether we agree what's happened during your childhood or even in adulthood, we're all a part of the same community and we need to respect one another. Today I'm trying to protect children. And when we do that, you said 30 years.
Yes.
So that's interesting, because my next question kind of pertains to that. Do you think there should be protections for people like you to be able to sue people that may have assisted in the abuse that happened as a child, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years later, for you to go back and detransition? Do you think there should be some kind of mechanism for that?
Yes, sir, I do. That is a little beyond the bounds of the bill, so I'm going to keep my comment short on that.
The reason I'm asking is obviously I'm talking about the same things, and I'm going to want to try to see if we can get something like that in there, because I think you deserve it.
From the work that I've done over the last several years and from many of the stories that I've heard, sir, there is a large gap between what the standards of care are as published by WPATH. And even there, that's a little contentious, because there's some questions whether that's really even a standard of care. But if you read the World Professional Association of Transgender Health Guidelines, they have a lot of explicit information about what constitutes being able to assess competency in adolescence, as well as what it actually takes to achieve consent in that relationship between the parents, the child, and the team of doctors. What we know is that every doctor who participates in this sort of care according to the WPATH standards should be making an independent call and judgment on whether the patient that they're treating is competent. What we know from stories from people inside of our network and people who detransition, you'll hear some more of these stories today, these assessments are not happening. And so the standard of care that everybody in this practice should be adhering to, they're not doing it. What's more is that in direct conversations that I've had with clinicians in several states in the last 2 years, I've been told repeatedly by practicing clinicians that in their opinion that the WPATH standards are too conservative and that they are not closely followed inside of their own practices. And sir, that includes one of the co-directors of the Indianapolis Riley Children's Clinic, who told me the same thing. And what I said to him is that if the standards of care, if the practices of the clinicians were at a much higher level, then one, we wouldn't see so many detransitioners coming out of the woodwork. They're here because there was no proper assessment for the most part. In some cases, you'll hear that there was a proper assessment, people detransitioned anyway, but we know that the standards are just the corners are being cut. And when we try to talk to the clinicians and we say, there is the standard, you can get certified in it. And they tell us, frankly, no, we think that that's too much of gatekeeping. We would rather allow people to come in and accomplish their goal of their personal development goals of transition than having any of these sorts of gatekeeping processes. We believe that they're telling the truth. They're professionals in the business, but it's very disheartening because the other mechanisms that we might have available in order to make sure that bad practitioners are not in the business are more or less unavailable. And I'll give you just the most urgent thing. Most lawyers will not take phone calls from detransitioners because
Mhm.
there is not enough for their firms to be able to build a case on for injury. And so even when the injury is apparent, and it goes beyond just an assessment of competency, but when the injury is actually a health injury and causes disability, even then lawyers will not take up those lawsuits because there's just nothing for them to build a case on as it stands. And that might change in the future, but I've heard I've heard personal anecdotes from many people who have looked at suing, and I've heard of more people giving up trying to sue and not being able to even have a meeting with attorneys just because of the nature of their injury.
And I think that cap is like $250,000 right now. I think that's what the number is. So I'm just going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
When you started the process, was there any time between the beginning of the process and the time that you transitioned where what we hear when we talk to people that are detransitioning, the medical professional, specifically the psychologist, and you may not know, told mom that your child will commit suicide or we need to do this process? Have you heard that with you or with any of your peers?
Not with me, but you'll hear several stories like that from some of the other detransitioners. It's a very common thing. I speak with parents as well, and that is one of the most common, I guess you'd almost say a trope of the clinical practice, is for children often in front of their parents to be, or parents often in front of their children to be told, if you don't let this child transition, they'll kill themselves.
So I said one more question, but I'm going to add one more too, because you kind of led me there. Would you say that some or all of the mental health professionals are assisting or participating in or pushing the transition? That they are part of the process, a huge part, and they're actually pushing it?
Yes. I can talk about some of my own personal experience with clinicians who, of course, I'm not a mind reader, so this is just my opinion or my inferences. But I have worked with a number of clinicians over the last 30 years who take a real pleasure in watching me be trans. My first endocrinologist was a woman in San Francisco who, and I know there's doctors in the room and on this panel, so I've heard only one thing about this, so I might hear a conflicting thing today, but she used to feel my breasts every single appointment that I would visit her to assess my breast development. I'm given to understand that that's actually not something that ought to be happening, particularly by the person providing you hormones, but she seemed, I'm guessing that that's not standard practice. Yeah, it was confusing. And
wow.
I do get the sense this wouldn't be all.
This person is basically testifying that their doctor molested them. That's crazy. That's genuinely crazy. Man, okay.
Clinicians that I have worked with, but certainly some of
people are asking to go back. Okay, I'm going to go back one more time so you guys can hear.
And that is one of the most common, I guess you'd almost say a trope of the clinical practice, is for children often in front of their parents to be, or parents often in front of their children to be told, if you don't let this child transition, they'll kill themselves.
So I said one more question, but I'm going to add one more too, because you kind of led me there. Would you say that some or all of the mental health professionals are assisting or participating in or pushing the transition? That they are part of the process, a huge part, and they're actually pushing it?
Yes. I can talk about some of my own personal experience with clinicians who, of course, I'm not a mind reader, so this is just my opinion or my inferences. But I have worked with a number of clinicians over the last 30 years who take a real pleasure in watching me be trans. My first endocrinologist was a woman in San Francisco who, and I know there's doctors in the room and on this panel, so I've heard only one thing about this, so I might hear a conflicting thing today. But she used to feel my breasts every single appointment that I would visit her to assess my breast development. I'm given to understand that that's actually not something that ought to be happening, particularly by the
Doctor
person
shaking his head.
providing you hormones, but she seemed, I'm guessing that that's not standard practice. Yeah, it was confusing.
Her doctor molested her. Because she's saying that the doctors get off on them being trans. Not all the doctors, we should acknowledge that. Some of them are just grossly committing medical malpractice. They're not committing sexual abuse necessarily. Can you imagine what those doctors are doing to the kids they're caring for? Let's keep going.
And I do get the sense, this wouldn't be all clinicians that I have worked with, but certainly some of them really seem to get something from their particular client base.
So you like this bill because you're for it.
Yes.
You're supporting it, and so do I. Do you have concerns that those psychologists may still be able to continue their part of the work?
If psychology is working correctly, and
So let me stop you there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm talking about the psychologists, like the one we had speak earlier,
sir.
will be able to continue the emotional and mental transition without the surgery. Do you think that's a problem if this bill passes without holding them accountable as well?
Sir, if they are open to other strategies other than only gender affirming therapy, then they should be able to continue working with those client bases, trying to find other methods of therapy that would address any comorbid mental health care problems, as well as finding good strategies, effective strategies for managing their feelings of gender dysphoria.
What about the percentage that are pushing people to get medical procedures done?
I hope that those people who are actually pushing people to have transition surgeries, I hope that those people are properly reported to their medical boards, investigated, and if that's truly what's happening, I hope that they face a hearing to defend their license.
So am I hearing that you hope that they're held accountable?
They absolutely must be held accountable.
Thank you.
Representative Alverson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karina, it's great to see you again. And this is obviously not the first conversation that you and I have had, but I think one of my colleagues was just texting me a minute ago that you are far and away the most authentic witness. And I think we all just tremendously admire. I know I personally admire your courage and just your authenticity for being here. And you came all the way from Indiana to testify today, right?
Yes, Representative.
Which is your home state.
It is.
And I think a lot of folks don't know, you kind of alluded to it, but your familiarity with the online community stems from the fact that that is your occupation, is you work in IT, right? So I mean,
Yes, sir.
Been doing that for many years. So you kind of talked about this a little bit, but I just want to kind of go back through this conversation because I think this is testimony that you can uniquely offer given your perspective as a member, of the LGBT community, right? And obviously you don't harbor any animus of any kind against. Nobody's going to argue that that you're anti-trans or that you're anti-LGBT, right?
I'm sorry to contradict you, sir, but there are people who argue that I am both of those things.
That say that you are?
Yes, sir.
That's crazy. I guess the first time you and I had this conversation, I remember there was somebody in the room who asked a very pointed question about the suicide issue. And you were talking about your experiences sort of being a member of a lot of these support groups and how, adolescents are treated nowadays when they come in and they're basically confused and sort of like, I think I might be
Oh, yes.
trans and, I'm, and somebody will, can you talk about that? I found that to
Sure.
be just fascinating, a conversation that's sort of going on out there in cyberspace that we don't even realize.
Thank you for asking, Representative. You might have heard sometimes in the media, you'll hear that there's like if you start following the wrong YouTube video, it'll lead you to become radicalized. I don't know if you believe that or not, but what I can tell you is that if you start searching online for the question, am I trans? And you start to go into the websites where those answers exist, that for sure you will not find any sort of independent or neutral evaluation that you would get if you were to see, for example, a psychotherapist. What you see in the online communities is a trend towards reaffirming or affirming to the person asking, well, you wouldn't even be asking if you thought you were trans, if you weren't even a little bit trans. And you can go on Reddit if you're interested. There are a number of communities, for example, like Ask Transgender or M2F or trans, or there's quite a few of these communities. And you can see that nearly on a daily basis, there will be questions posted by people who are questioning their identity. And although there are sometimes a small number of responses saying something very rational, which is you shouldn't be asking the internet for God's sake, you should be asking your psychotherapist. There are nevertheless a lot of people in those communities who say, well, if you feel a tug of joy when somebody calls you she, that means you're transgender.
Wow.
Or if you imagine changing your name and that thought makes you happy, you're transgender. Or if you like wearing clothes of the opposite sex and that gives you a form of euphoria, that means
in the trans discords that I was kind of working on this project where we're going to infiltrate like trans discords and things and just see what they were talking about a while ago, and then I kind of dropped it because for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was that it was too toxic. Some people can still do it if they want to. But when I was like trolling around the trans discords, one of the things that they did in all the trans discords was they had these threads where people could practice with different names and practice with different pronouns. And they would have other people in the Discord call them different names and different pronouns just to see how it felt to do that. And then they would like take turns affirming each other for their those new names and pronouns. And the pronoun list in these discords is not just like, it's not like they, them, zim, zer, z, whatever. We are talking a list of hundreds of pronouns. Hundreds of pronouns. And when you log on to the Discord, you're supposed to put symbols next to the ones that like you kind of like or identify as. It's really messed up.
means you're transgender. So a lot of people who are looking on the internet for guidance, which I think every time any of us are sick, we type that in Google and figure out what it is. They're being led to all of these sorts of communities where they're getting the message over and over. If you doubt at all, then you should consider that you're transgender. And by the way, here's some quizzes that you can take. There's a pretty popular guide. Unfortunately, I don't have it referenced here, but there's a whole guide that exists to knock down arguments of why somebody is not trans.
Are there conversations in these groups and support, channels, and I don't know the right terms, but in these internet groups, are there conversations that crop up about self-harm, and what do people say to somebody who's, honestly, like, I'm thinking about hurting myself, kind of thing? What kind of conversations come up then?
I don't recollect any particular conversations about that. I know I've seen it in passing, but I don't,
Okay.
at the top of my memory, remember
Okay, no
specific
problem.
conversations
I'm
about
sorry.
that.
Okay. Do they ever talk about, strategies for dealing with your parents if your parents maybe aren't
Yes.
supportive, and what you should do and how you should approach that issue?
Yeah, there's online, there are a number of people that you might call influencers who provide what you might also, if you're being generous, call guidance to youths who are in that position. And there's in fact a whole vocabulary around helping young people to connect with role models, adult role models outside of their families to help facilitate access to transition resources, which include, by the way, access to hormones without a prescription that will provide young people these drugs just by them saying, I really need some help. So it's sort of these networks, informal networks, providing sometimes overage or extra hormones, or sometimes even what the lingo they call it is bathtub estrogen, which is
that doesn't sound good.
made in somebody's residence and then shipped out from other countries to the United States, which I should point out that in states where these sorts of bans take effect, there will be a small number of people who continue to seek these types of resources, either through these informal networks or through estrogen overseas. But there's also this idea called a glitter family, which is these are the adult peers who help to teach you about being trans or being gay or lesbian. And I think that there should be good resources. I think the Trevor Project, when it was formed, was developed to have this mission to be a good resource for teenagers who need this sort of assistance, where their parents are disapproving or even hostile towards them, so that these people can get into networks of having help. But what I have observed is that there's no more oversight or adults in the room making sure that these types of networks are free from abuse or manipulation.
Last question. We were talking about lingo, and you kind of triggered something that I think you were talking about over in the Senate hearing, but I wanted to revisit with you. What is cracking the egg? Can you talk about that? What does that mean?
Sure. The term is cracking someone's egg. This is trans lingo, and relatively modern. And the idea is that if you find somebody that has a little bit of indecision or confusion about whether they should identify as transgender or not, that if you are able to take that person under their wing and coach them so that they feel like they're comfortable to come out, then they do. That is said to be cracking somebody's egg. And you'll hear people use maybe the reflective term. They'll say that I hatched on this date. And this is very common lingo now, but hatching is when your egg has been successfully cracked.
And are these medical professionals that crack eggs, or are these just sort of people that like your glitter family and people that you meet and stuff like that?
Sir, I think that if there's any more medical professionals testifying today, you should ask them.
Okay. All right. Okay. Karina, I thank you for being here today. Appreciate your testimony.
Wow.
Representative Jones.
That was so powerful. And guys, I know there are more detransitioners coming up in that are going to testify. We're going to be seeing a lot of those, but I do want to just take a pause there. We've watched a lot today. I know it was only 3 people that we watched, but well, I guess no, 4, maybe 4. Anyway, that's been a lot to process. That's 2 hours of testimony. We've been going for 3 hours and 15 minutes. That testimony in particular, my God, I feel like I need to watch that again to really process all of it. But again, like the most shocking, but like not really shocking thing for me is that her doctors literally molested her. Her doctors were getting off on it. Shocking, but not shocking at exactly the same time. And what a sad state of affairs that is. So guys, I think we're going to put a pin in it there. Let's all process. Let's take some time to think. I'm going to be making some clips tonight, I can tell you that. And we will regroup tomorrow. Now, I'm not sure if tomorrow we're going to be watching more of this or if we're going to be doing something else. I'm kind of thinking watching more of this right now. That's kind of where my head is leaning into, just because this has been such a valuable exercise. We really, when these things come up in state houses and we have the opportunity to watch this stuff, we should do more of it if we can. Because you know, I've I've seen some testimony on bills that I think are helpful. I've seen some testimony on bills that I think are a sideshow. I've given testimony on a bill that I thought was a sideshow and treated it like a sideshow. So I don't always take this stuff as seriously as like maybe it merits. But I think that all the testimony we've seen so far on this bill has just been really, really good. It doesn't feel strenuous watching it. It feels like it's something that needs to be watched. And there are so few people that are going to watch the whole thing. So I think we should keep going. And I think we'll probably keep going tomorrow. But I'm going to save space for the fact that something else might come up tomorrow. But I think we should probably keep going tomorrow and just consider that part of the plan. Guys, that is all I have for tonight. Now, as a reminder, if you want to be notified when I post some nice clippy clips later today, please make sure you are subscribed to my main Substack, carlin.substack.com. I have an exciting announcement. Because of the support of all of you, I've just broken, like literally on this stream, like 15 minutes ago, I just broke $10,000 of income via this Substack this year. That's a really big deal. And I want to make sure people understand why that's a big deal. Because it's not just that like money buys stuff, which is nice, or pays mortgages or things like that, but being able to give you guys good, solid content that is nuanced, that is not outrage porn clickbait, that has receipts, that shows you what's going on and allows you to decide for yourself. And you guys being willing to support that work, that means that I'm going to be able to continue providing these resources for you and continue to build out my offering. So that's a pretty big effing milestone. I'm really excited about it. I'm really happy about it. Thank you guys so much for supporting my work. I really do appreciate it. Guys, please make sure you are subscribed, even at like a free subscription or for $5 a month, $50 a year on carlin.substack.com. If you want to know what I'm working on with those resources, I actually do this very transparently. You can check out this article that I wrote titled "Help Me Create These Unwoke Resources for You to Help Fight Back Against Woke Insanity," and you can see exactly what my plan is and exactly what I'm working on. You might also want to take part in the Unwoke Art AI contest that we are having right now on my Unwoke Art Substack. This is going to be a ton of fun. I explain it in the rules on the Substack, so you guys can go and check that out. But I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Mount that like button on your way out the door if you haven't already. Take care. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.